The sound of metal against bone isn't something you forget. Neither is the sight of your little sister crawling across a cafeteria floor while 300 students pretend not to see. Ethan Collins stood frozen in the doorway of Millbrook High's cafeteria, his Marine Corps dress blues still pristine from the memorial service he'd attended that morning. He'd come to surprise Becca for lunch, their first meal together since his return from Afghanistan. What he found instead was a scene that would haunt him more than any battlefield memory. Rebecca Collins, 16 years old and paralyzed from the waist down, was dragging herself across grimy linoleum while her custom wheelchair lay in pieces around her. Above her towered Tyler Mitchell, Millbrook's golden boy quarterback, his Letterman jacket catching the fluorescent lights like armor. "Still playing detective, Rebecca?" Tyler's voice carried across the silent cafeteria. "Maybe next time you'll mind your own business." The rage that flooded Ethan's system was different from combat adrenaline. This was personal. This was family. But as he stepped forward, his trained eyes caught something the other students missed. The way Tyler's hands trembled despite his bravado, the unnatural dilation of his pupils, the sheen of chemical sweat on his neck. This wasn't just teenage cruelty. This was something else. Becca's fingers found purchase on a table leg, and she pulled herself forward another foot. Her face remained eerily calm, but Ethan knew that look. Their mother had worn it in every video message from Afghanistan. The mask you wear when breaking isn't an option. "Ethan," Becca's voice cut through his fury. She'd spotted him, and in her eyes he saw not relief, but warning. "Don't." But sometimes don't isn't an option. Sometimes you come home from war only to find the enemy followed you back. 3 weeks, that's how long Ethan had been stateside, trying to remember how to be a brother instead of a weapon. 3 weeks of watching Becca navigate her new reality with a grace that made his own struggles with PTSD seem trivial. She never complained about the wheelchair, never mentioned the pain that shadowed her movements, never asked why God had taken their mother in Afghanistan and left her trapped in steel and leather. He'd been planning this surprise for days. Drive down from Fort Hood, take her to lunch at that BQ place she loved before the accident, maybe catch a movie, normal brother-sister stuff, the kind of simple pleasures that had kept him sane during 18 months in hell. The morning had started with promise. He'd attended Sergeant Miller's memorial, another good Marine lost to an IED, and somehow the ceremony had given him clarity. Life was short. Family was everything. The demons in his head could wait while he spent time with the only family he had left. The drive to Millbrook had been therapeutic. Windows down, Texas sun baking away the Afghan cold that still lived in his bones. He'd even stopped at HEB to grab those sour gummy worms Becca loved, the ones their mom used to hide in care packages. Finding her wasn't hard. In a school of 2,000 students, the girl in the wheelchair was always easy to spot. What he hadn't expected was to find her like this. "Someone help her!" A voice cracked through the silence, a freshman girl with more courage than sense. "Shut up, Emily," one of Tyler's teammates growled, "unless you want to be next." Ethan processed the scene with tactical precision. 3 primary threats. Tyler and 2 teammates, all wearing Letterman jackets, all displaying similar signs of chemical enhancement. Secondary concerns, at least 6 other football players scattered throughout the cafeteria, potentially hostile. Tertiary, the complete absence of faculty, which meant this was either terrible timing or orchestrated. His sister had stopped crawling. She sat upright now, back against a pillar, that same eerie calm masking whatever storm raged inside. In her lap, she clutched something, a worn notebook Ethan recognized instantly, their mother's field notes from her last deployment. "You know what your problem is, Rebecca?" Tyler stepped closer, his cleats clicking on the floor like a countdown. "You don't know when to stop digging, just like your mom." The temperature in Ethan's world dropped to absolute zero. Their mother, combat nurse Janet Collins, killed in action, Kandahar province, Afghanistan. IED attack on her medical convoy while trying to reach wounded Marines. Ethan had been 2 provinces away, had heard the explosion over comms, had known before the official word came down that his world had just gotten darker. But Tyler Mitchell, this small-town Texas high school quarterback, had no right to speak her name. "My mom died saving lives," Becca's voice was steady, stronger now. "Yours is killing them." Tyler's foot connected with a piece of the broken wheelchair, sending it skittering across the floor. Careful. Accidents happen. Just ask your dad about that scaffolding. The scaffolding? Ethan's mind raced. The accident that had put Becca in the wheelchair had happened while he was deployed. A construction accident at the new stadium. The official report said faulty equipment. Tragic timing. Becca had been there taking photos for the school paper, documenting the booster club's crown jewel, $25 million of Texas excess built by the company Mitchell's father had connections with. She'd fallen 30 feet, broken her L2 and L3 vertebrae, severed her spinal cord. The doctors called it a miracle she survived it all. Except now, watching Tyler's reaction, seeing the way his teammates shifted nervously, Ethan wondered if accident was just another lie he'd swallowed because the truth was too terrible to consider. "You pushed me," Becca said quietly, and the cafeteria seemed to inhale collectively. "I remember now. The medication, the trauma, it blocked it out. But I remember. You were there, you and Marcus and Dylan. You pushed me." Tyler's face went through a transformation that confirmed everything. The cocky mask slipped, revealing something desperate and dangerous underneath. "You can't prove anything. My dad made sure." He caught himself, but the damage was done. Ethan had heard enough confessions in interrogation rooms to recognize one. But before he could move, before his trained muscles could spring into action, another voice cut through the tension. "Actually, she can prove it." Sarah Mitchell stepped out from behind the lunch line, her phone held high. Former cheerleader, current school newspaper editor, and according to the gossip Ethan had overheard, Tyler's ex-girlfriend, the one whose previous boyfriend had died of a heart attack during summer training. "I've been recording everything," Sarah continued, her voice shaking but determined. "Not just today. For weeks, ever since Jack died." Jack Thompson. Ethan remembered the name from news reports. Star running back. Full scholarship to UT. Found dead in the locker room. Cardiac arrest at 17. Natural causes, the medical examiner had ruled. Case closed. "You little bitch," Tyler snarled. And that's when Ethan saw it. The moment predator became prey. Tyler's hand went to his Letterman jacket pocket, fingers closing around something inside. The movement was subtle, practiced. How many times had he reached for whatever chemical courage lived in that pocket? "Tyler, don't!" One of his teammates, Marcus, grabbed his arm. "Not here, man. Too many witnesses." "Witnesses?" Tyler laughed high and unhinged. "Look around, Marcus. Nobody sees anything at Millbrook. Nobody ever sees anything." He was right in a way. The cafeteria held 300 students, but most had found somewhere else to look. The wall, the ceiling, their phones. Anywhere but at the disabled girl on the floor and the boy who'd put her there. It was easier that way. Safer. But not everyone looked away. Rosa Martinez, the cafeteria worker who'd served these kids lunch for 25 years, stood by the kitchen doors with her phone out, recording. Deputy Frank Tanner, the school resource officer who'd just returned from a suspicious bathroom break, had his hand on his radio. Emily, the freshman who'd spoken up, was crying but still watching. And Ethan Collins, Force Recon Marine, survivor of 18 months in hell, was done being a witness. He moved with the economy of someone who'd learned that wasted motion got you killed. Not rushing, not threatening, just closing distance with inevitable purpose. The football players noticed. Of course they did. Predators always recognize bigger predators. "You must be the brother," Tyler said, trying to reclaim his bravado. "The war hero. PTSD, I hear. Makes people see things that aren't there. Do things they regret." It was a clever threat wrapped in false sympathy. Tyler was smarter than he looked. Or maybe his father had coached him on how to handle situations like this. Paint the combat veteran as unstable. Create doubt about any testimony he might give. "You know what's interesting about PTSD?" Ethan kept his voice conversational as he reached Becca, kneeling beside her while keeping Tyler in his peripheral vision. "It doesn't make you hallucinate. It makes you hypervigilant, makes you notice things other people miss." He helped Becca sit up straighter, his hands gentle, but his eyes never leaving the threats. "Like the way you're all sweating in a 60-degree cafeteria. The way Marcus keeps rubbing his chest like it hurts. The way Dylan's nose has been bleeding for the past 5 minutes. and he doesn't even notice. Dylan's hand went to his face, came away red. Trenbolone, Becca said quietly, mixed with something else. Something to make it stronger, more addictive. Mom saw it in Afghanistan. Soldiers trying to become superhuman. It works for a while, then your heart explodes. Shut up. Tyler pulled something from his pocket. Not the syringe Ethan expected, but a knife, a tactical folder. Illegal on school grounds. But then again, so was assault. You don't know anything. I know you killed Jack. Sarah stepped closer, her phone still recording. I know Coach has been importing from Mexico, cutting it with God knows what, and selling it to half the team. And I know, Becca added, steel in her voice now, that when I got too close to finding out, you tried to kill me too. Pushed me off that scaffolding, made it look like an accident. The knife shook in Tyler's hand. Around him, his teammates backed away, the pack unity fracturing as self-preservation kicked in. Marcus was openly crying now, blood seeping from his nose too. Dylan had sat down hard, clutching his chest. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Tyler's voice broke, and for a moment Ethan saw him clearly. Not a monster, but a kid, destroyed by his own father's ambition, poisoned by the very thing that was supposed to make him great. We were just supposed to win, just supposed to bring home another championship. Nobody was supposed to die, Ethan said quietly, but they did, and more will, unless this ends now. Tyler looked at the knife in his hand like he'd never seen it before. Then at Becca, still on the floor, still clutching their mother's notebook. At Sarah with her phone. At his dying teammates. At the future he'd already lost. My dad said no one would believe a cripple, he whispered. Said even if you remembered. Who'd take your word over mine? Everyone, Rosa Martinez spoke up, her accent thick with emotion. My nephew died from this poison. 17 years old. Heart attack at 17. I believe her. I believe her, Deputy Tanner added, his radio crackling to life as backup arrived. I believe her, Emily, the freshman, said through her tears. One by one, voices rose from the crowd that had been silent moments before. Students who'd lost friends to accidents, who'd watched teammates change, rage out, collapse during practice, who'd been too scared to speak until someone else went first. Tyler Mitchell, golden boy of Millbrook, star quarterback with the $1 million arm and $1 million future, fell to his knees. The knife clattered away behind him. Sirens wailed as the real police arrived, not the locals on Coach Mitchell's payroll, but state troopers Deputy Tanner had quietly called. Ethan gathered his sister into his arms, lifting her easily. She weighed nothing, this girl who carried so much. Let's get you out of here, he murmured. My chair, she protested weakly. We'll get you a better one that can't be broken by cowards. As he carried her toward the exit, Becca looked back at Tyler, now surrounded by paramedics trying to save his teammates. I would have helped him, she said quietly. If he'd asked, if any of them had asked, instead of this. That was their mother in her, the healer's instinct that transcended personal hurt. Ethan had lost that somewhere in Afghanistan, traded it for survival skills and a talent for violence. But Becca had kept it, even after everything. They passed Sarah Mitchell, still recording, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Becca told her. Jack would have wanted. He tried to quit the stuff. He wanted to get clean, but they wouldn't let him. She swallowed hard. Said he knew too much. Now everyone will know, Ethan promised. No more secrets. Deputy Tanner met them at the door. Ambulance is here for your sister, and federal agents are en route. This is bigger than just Millbrook. The DEA's been tracking this pipeline for months. Months? Ethan's voice could have cut steel. And how many kids died while they tracked? Tanner had no answer for that. Outside, the Texas sun felt like benediction after the fluorescent tomb of the cafeteria. Ethan settled Becca gently on the ambulance gurney, staying close as EMTs checked her for injuries beyond the obvious. I'm okay, she insisted, then looked at her brother with eyes too old for 16. But you're not. Are you? He wanted to lie, to play the strong protector, but she'd earned better than that. No, he admitted, but I will be. We both will be. Mom would have been proud, Becca said softly. You didn't hurt him, even though you wanted to. even though he deserved it. Ethan thought of all the times overseas when violence had been the only answer, when being a weapon had kept him and his brothers alive. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was home. And maybe, just maybe, there were other ways to fight. She would have been proud of you, he corrected, speaking truth when everyone wanted you silent. That takes more courage than any battlefield. More sirens filled the air. Through the cafeteria windows, they could see chaos. Students being escorted out, football players being loaded into ambulances, men in FBI windbreakers setting up a perimeter. The empire of Friday Night Lights was crumbling, and all because one girl in a wheelchair had refused to look away. Ethan? Becca clutched his hand as the ambulance prepared to leave. What happens now? He thought of the long road ahead, trials, testimony, death threats from a town that worshipped football more than justice. He thought of his own demons, the nightmares that would come harder now that he had found a new war to fight. He thought of their mother buried in Arlington, while her daughter fought battles she'd never imagined. Now, Ethan squeezed her hand, we finish what you started. We make sure Jack and the others didn't die for nothing. We find out why Tyler knew about Mom. We burn it all down and build something better. Together. As the ambulance pulled away, Ethan heard his phone buzz. A text from an unknown number. You have no idea what you've done. This doesn't end with Tyler. Your sister should have stayed quiet. He looked back at the school, at the empire of secrets built on children's bodies, and typed back, good, let them come. We're not running anymore. Because sometimes the real war isn't overseas. Sometimes it's in your own backyard, wearing a Letterman jacket and hiding behind tradition. And sometimes the strongest warrior isn't the one with the gun. It's the girl who refuses to let her broken body break her spirit. The battle for Millbrook had begun, and for the first time since coming home, Ethan Collins knew exactly where he belonged. Standing beside his sister, facing whatever came next. Together. The hospital room smelled like every other military medical facility Ethan had known. Antiseptic, fighting a losing battle against human fear. But this wasn't Landstuhl or Walter Reed. This was Millbrook General. And the girl in the bed wasn't another wounded warrior, but his baby sister, small and fierce against white sheets. Stop looking at me like I'm dying, Becca said without opening her eyes. It's just bruises and a mild concussion. I've had worse from physical therapy. Ethan forced his fists to unclench. Through the window, he could see unmarked federal vehicles filling the parking lot. Whatever Tyler Mitchell had started in that cafeteria had awakened something much bigger. The doctor wants to keep you overnight for observation, he said. The doctor can kiss my... Rebecca Grace Collins. Both siblings turned to find Rosa Martinez in the doorway, still wearing her cafeteria uniform, still clutching her phone like a lifeline. Behind her stood Deputy Tanner, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 hours. Sorry to interrupt, Tanner said, though his eyes said he wasn't sorry at all. But we have a problem. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to where his sidearm would be, found only empty air, old habits. Tyler Mitchell is missing. Missing or running? Ethan asked. Both, probably. His father posted bail an hour ago. Local judge, old football buddy. By the time the feds realized what happened, both Mitchells had vanished, along with about 6 key players from the team. They're going for the lab, Becca said, pushing herself upright despite Ethan's protests. Under the stadium. They'll try to destroy evidence, cover their tracks. FBI is already en route, Tanner assured her. Full tactical team. But Becca was shaking her head, fumbling for their mother's notebook. You don't understand. Mom wrote about this. Similar operation in Kandahar. Military-grade performance enhancers being tested on local fighters. When the lab was compromised, they didn't just destroy evidence. They released everything. Chemical cocktail turned a city block into a war zone. 37 dead. The room went silent except for the steady beep of monitors. Why would your mother document that? Rosa asked softly. Because she was building a case, Ethan answered, pieces clicking together in his mind. She wasn't just a combat nurse. She was investigating. Someone in our supply chain was selling medical-grade enhancers to the Taliban. And when she got too close, Becca finished, her convoy hit an IED. Just like when I got too close, I fell off scaffolding. Ethan's phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Stadium midnight, come alone or she dies next time. He showed it to Tanner, who immediately started making calls. But Ethan's mind is elsewhere, remembering his mother's last video message. If anything happens to me, protect your sister. She's stronger than she knows, but that strength will make her enemies. I'm going, he said. Like hell you are. Becca grabbed his arm with surprising strength. This is exactly what they want. You alone in their territory. She's right, Tanner added. Let the FBI handle it, but the FBI doesn't know the stadium like I do, Ethan interrupted. I helped install the security system 2 summers ago. Needed money for college before I enlisted. I know every entrance, every blind spot. Then I'm coming with you, Becca declared. You can barely sit up. I don't need to sit up. I need to think. And you need someone who understands what we're looking for. She held up their mother's notebook. These chemical formulas. I'm the only one who can identify them quickly enough to matter. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to lock her somewhere safe until this was over. But looking at her face, their mother's determination mixed with their father's stubbornness, he knew it was pointless. Fine, but we do this my way. When have I ever listened to you? Becca managed a ghost of their old sibling dynamic. There's a first time for everything. By 10 p.m., Millbrook felt like a town under siege. Federal agents had cordoned off the high school. The local news ran continuous coverage, interviewing shocked parents who never saw this coming and students who always knew something was wrong. The hospital had discharged at least 12 football players, all showing signs of long-term steroid abuse. 3 were in critical condition. Ethan pushed Becca's borrowed wheelchair through empty streets, Tanner flanking them despite official orders to stand down. Rosa had gone home to pray, but not before pressing a small wooden cross into Becca's hand for protection. She'd whispered, "It was my nephew's." Sarah Mitchell had vanished after giving her a statement to the FBI. But she'd sent Becca a file, dozens of videos, dates, and times of transactions, conversations about packages and testing. Jack Thompson featured in many of them, growing increasingly desperate as he tried to escape the web that would eventually kill him. He was a good kid, Becca said quietly as they approached the stadium. Tutored me in calculus after the accident, never asked for anything in return. The $25 million monument to Texas football excess loomed against the night sky, its lights dark for the first time Ethan could remember. Even in summer, those lights blazed for camps, practices, community events. Now it looked like what it truly was, a tomb. Motion sensors are disabled, Tanner observed, checking his phone. Internal cameras too. Either the feds did that or Coach Mitchell still has override codes, Ethan finished. Tanner, you don't have to do this. You've already risked your career. The deputy checked his service weapon. My cousin played for Millbrook 5 years ago, dead at 22, enlarged heart. I've been waiting for this chance. They entered through the maintenance tunnel Ethan remembered from his installation days. The air grew thicker as they descended. Chemical smell mixing with something else. Desperation, maybe. Or death. Ethan, Becca whispered, pointing to marks on the concrete. Claw marks. Someone tried to escape from down here. The tunnel opened into a sub-basement hidden beneath legitimate foundation work. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, revealing a sophisticated operation. Lab equipment, packaging stations, distribution maps covering 5 states. Jesus, Tanner breathed. This isn't high school dealers. This is cartel level. No, Becca corrected, studying labels with growing horror. This is worse. Look at these compounds. They're mixing veterinary steroids with combat stimulants, adding synthetic opioids for addiction. This isn't about making athletes stronger. It's about creating dependent customers who will do anything for the next dose. A sound echoed through the space, metal on concrete, rhythmic and wrong. Ethan pushed Becca behind a storage rack, motioning Tanner to flank left. The sound grew closer, and with it, labored breathing. Tyler Mitchell stumbled into view, and Ethan barely recognized him. The golden boy was gone, replaced by something monstrous. Veins bulged black beneath his skin. His eyes were crimson where they should be white. In his hand, a sledgehammer dragged sparks from the floor. Knew you'd come, Tyler slurred, blood running from his nose. Hero complex runs in the family. Where's your father? Ethan kept his voice steady, calculating distances and angles. Gone. Left me to clean up. Always leaving me to clean up. Tyler laughed, a wet sound that ended in coughing. Gave me one last dose. Said it would make me strong enough to finish this. Tyler. Becca rolled out from cover, ignoring Ethan's hiss of warning. You're dying. Whatever he gave you, it's killing you. Let me help. Help? Tyler lifted the sledgehammer with inhuman ease. Like you helped Jack, asking questions, making him doubt? He was going to the feds. We had to. You killed him. Not a question. Dad killed him. I just held him down. The admission came with more blood, darker now. Said it was for the team, for the legacy, for Millbrook. Some legacy, Tanner stepped out, weapon drawn but pointed down. How many others, Tyler? How many kids did you poison for a trophy? All of them, every single player in 3 years. Tyler's eyes were unfocused now. Win at any cost, right? That's what you people wanted, championships, glory. You didn't care how we got there. He wasn't wrong, Ethan realized. The whole town had worshipped winning, never questioning the price. Parents who bragged about their son's sudden muscle gains. Coaches who looked away from obvious signs. Doctors who signed clearances without asking hard questions. But she asked. Tyler pointed the hammer at Becca. Little cripple couldn't leave it alone. Had to play detective like her mommy. What do you know about my mother? Becca's voice was steel. Tyler grinned, teeth stained red. Dad told me she found out about the first lab, the one in Afghanistan, threatened to expose the whole network. Military contractors, CIA, black funds, all of it. So they killed her. Made it look like enemy action. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Ethan felt the world tilt, everything he thought he knew shifting into new horrible configurations. His mother hadn't died a hero. She'd been murdered by her own side. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. My. Tyler pulled a phone from his pocket, threw it at their feet. Check the messages. Dear old dad kept everything, insurance, he called it. Becca grabbed the phone with shaking hands, scrolling through years of encrypted messages. Her face went white. Ethan, oh God, Ethan, it's all here. Mom's investigation. The threats, the order to neutralize. They killed her. The rage that filled Ethan then was unlike anything he'd felt in combat. This was pure distilled fury, not at an enemy, but at a system, a conspiracy that had taken their mother and tried to take Becca too. Where's your father? He asked again, voice deadly quiet. Private jet to Mexico, has a compound down there. Runs the whole operation. Tyler swayed, hammer dropping from nerveless fingers. Supposed to meet him after I burned this place down. The chemicals, Becca said urgently. If he's got incendiaries down here mixing with these compounds. Boom, Tyler finished, falling to his knees. Big enough to level the block. Timer's already running. 10 minutes, maybe less. Tanner, get her out, Ethan ordered. Not without you, Becca protested. I'm not leaving. Ethan was already moving, combat instincts taking over. I need to find the device. See if I can disable it. You need to live. You need to live, Tyler gasped, surprising them all. Both of you. Someone has to tell the story. Make it mean something. Tyler, Becca started. I'm already dead, have been since the first injection. He looked at her with eyes that were briefly, terribly lucid. I'm sorry about the chair, about your mom, about all of it. Tell Jack. Tell him I'm sorry. Jack's dead, Tanner said gently. I know, doesn't matter. Still need to say it. Tyler Mitchell, terror of Millbrook High, collapsed forward and didn't move again. 17 years old, destroyed by his father's ambition and his town's hunger for glory. Movement upstairs, Tanner reported, radio crackling. Multiple vehicles, not feds. Dad's cleanup crew, Becca realized. They're not here to save evidence. They're here to make sure we burn with it. Ethan made a command decision. Tanner, take Becca up the north tunnel. I'll buy time. Try to disable. No, Becca's voice cut through his protests. Mom died alone. I won't let you do the same. This isn't a debate. You're right, it's not. She pulled something from beneath her jacket. Their mother's service pistol. The one Ethan thought was locked in his truck. Either we all leave or we all stay. Where did you? I'm paralyzed, not stupid. The ghost of a smile crossed her face. Now stop wasting time and find that bomb. The next 5 minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Ethan located the incendiary device, military grade, because of course it was. Coach Mitchell had connections everywhere. The timer showed 3:47. Can you disable it? Tanner asked. Maybe if I had tools, time, and no one shooting at us. Footsteps echoed from above. Which we don't have. Then we run, Becca decided. But first she grabbed a laptop from one of the workstations, yanking out its hard drive. Evidence. Mom would want evidence. They made it halfway up the tunnel before the cleanup crew found them. The first shot sparked off concrete inches from Ethan's head, combat reflexes saving him. He returned fire while Tanner covered Becca, the narrow tunnel becoming a killing funnel. Timer? Becca shouted. 90 seconds. Ethan did the math. They wouldn't make it. Not all of them. Someone would have to stay. Hold the tunnel. Buy time. Go, he told Tanner. Get her out. Ethan, no. Becca reached for him, but Tanner was already moving, dragging the wheelchair despite her protests. Tell her story, Ethan called after them. Tell Mom's story. Make it matter. He turned back to face the oncoming killers, settling into a shooter's stance. This was what he knew. This was what he was good at, protecting his family, even if it cost everything. The first man rounded the corner and died before he could fire. The second got a shot off, pain blooming in Ethan's shoulder. He kept shooting. 30 seconds now. 20. Then, impossibly, gunfire erupted behind the cleanup crew. Federal agents poured in from another entrance, having tracked the vehicles. The tunnel became chaos. And in that case, Ethan ran. He burst from the maintenance door just as the first explosion rocked the stadium. The ground heaved, throwing him forward. The second blast was bigger, chemical enhanced, turning night into hellish day. The third brought the whole structure down, $25 million of corruption collapsing into rubble. Ethan found Becca and Tanner 100 yards away, all three watching the inferno that had nearly claimed them. Federal agents swarmed the scene, but Ethan only had eyes for his sister. You stayed, she said simply. You're my sister. Where else would I go? She reached up, taking his hand. We need to disappear for a while. Mitchell's connections, the people who killed Mom, they'll come for us. I know. Ethan looked at the burning stadium, at the federal agents, at the town that would never be the same. But first we tell the story, all of it, together. Together. The morning after chaos always feels surreal. Ethan Collins had experienced this phenomenon countless times in Afghanistan. The eerie quiet that settles after a firefight. The strange normality that tries to reassert itself over fresh craters. But experiencing it in Millbrook, Texas was different. Here, the wounds weren't in the landscape, but in the social fabric of a town built on secrets. Millbrook General Hospital hummed with the controlled chaos of a facility operating beyond capacity. 3 football players remained in critical condition. 5 more were under observation. The local news vans had multiplied overnight. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward like technological sunflowers seeking truth instead of light. Ethan sat in the hospital cafeteria, his third cup of coffee growing cold between his palms. He hadn't slept. The adrenaline crash had never come. His mind kept replaying Tyler's words on an endless loop. They killed her, made it look like enemy action. Could it be true? His mother, combat nurse Janet Collins, whose Medal of Honor hung in their living room, whose name was etched on a memorial at Walter Reed, murdered by her own side? The thought made his coffee taste like ashes. You look like hell, Marine. Ethan looked up to find an older man in a white coat standing at his table, silver-haired and straight-backed despite his age. The name tag read Dr. Edward Williams, but it was the small pin on his lapel that caught Ethan's attention. The emblem of the 5th Medical Battalion, his mother's old unit. I've looked worse, sir, Ethan replied automatically. No doubt. Dr. Williams sat without asking permission. His eyes were the washed-out blue of faded denim, weathered by years of seeing too much. I knew your mother. Afghanistan, 19 to 21. Best trauma nurse I ever worked with. Ethan straightened, suddenly alert. You were with her convoy? A shadow crossed the older man's face. No, I was at the base when they brought her in. Nothing to be done by then. He paused, studying Ethan with clinical precision. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here about your sister and what happened at the stadium last night. What about it? I'm not the only doctor in this town, Collins, but I'm the only one who's going to tell you the truth. Williams leaned forward, voice dropping. This thing with the football team, it's not new and it's not isolated. I've been tracking unusual cardiac events in Millbrook athletes for almost 5 years. Arrhythmias, hypertrophy, sudden cardiac death in otherwise healthy teenagers. The kind of thing that gets written off as tragic but not suspicious. Like Jack Thompson, Ethan supplied. Among others, I tried bringing it up with the medical board 2 years ago. Next day, my practice was audited. Week after that, my wife's car was run off the road. Accident, they said. Message received. The doctor's jaw tightened. So I kept my head down, collected data quietly. But what happened last night blew the lid off. Now I need to know if you're just stirring up trouble or if you're actually looking for answers. Ethan considered the man before him. Old school military, probably Vietnam era. The type who'd seen the system fail before and learned to work around it. The type his father would have trusted. I want answers, Ethan said finally. About the drugs, about what happened to Becca, and about my mother. Williams nodded once, satisfied. Then I should show you something. Dr. Williams's office was a small, cluttered space in the oldest wing of the hospital. Faded diplomas shared wall space with maps of Southeast Asia marked with medical unit deployments. A small shrine of unit patches and medals occupied one corner, the visible evidence of a career spent patching up America's warriors. The doctor locked the door behind them, then moved to a filing cabinet that looked older than Ethan. From its bottom drawer, he retrieved a thick folder labeled simply Athena. In Greek mythology, Athena was the goddess of strategic warfare, Williams explained, placing the folder on his desk. Also wisdom, strength, and athleticism. Fitting name for a military program designed to create super soldiers, wouldn't you say? Ethan's blood ran cold. Is that what this is about? It started that way. Vietnam era initially. Army wanted fighters who could go longer, feel less pain, carry more weight. The usual wish list. The early results were unpredictable, but they kept at it. Every conflict brought new refinements, new compounds, new delivery systems. And my mother found out about it. Williams's eyes flicked to the door, an old habit of the perpetually vigilant. Janet wasn't just a nurse, son. She was part of a special medical intelligence unit, officially tracking disease vectors in combat zones. Unofficially, well, let's just say she had a knack for noticing things others missed, like when local fighters started displaying unusual physical capabilities, enhanced strength, abnormal endurance, aggression beyond cultural norms. He opened the folder, revealing pages of chemical formulas, after-action reports, medical charts, a meticulously compiled history of something the public was never meant to see. She tracked unusual pharmaceutical shipments, documented case studies, built a pattern, and eventually she traced it back to a supply chain that originated right here in the U.S. with a certain Dr. Richard Mitchell Sr., former Army surgeon, father of your current coach Mitchell, grandfather to your quarterback friend. 3 generations, Ethan murmured, pieces clicking together. The grandfather developed it, the father refined it, and the grandson distributes it. The Mitchell legacy isn't just championships. Ethan's mind raced through implications. So when my mother started investigating, she became a threat to a very profitable, very illegal operation with ties to military contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and God knows what else. Williams closed the folder. 3 weeks after she filed her preliminary report, her convoy hit that IED. Very convenient timing. The rage that had been simmering in Ethan's chest since the cafeteria scene threatened to boil over. He forced himself to breathe, to think like the Marine he'd been trained to be, assess the situation, identify the objective, plan the operation. I need to see everything she documented, he said finally. And I need to know who else was involved. Williams nodded, handing over the folder. Start with this, but be careful who you show it to. Millbrook might look like a small town, but its shadows run deep. The Mitchells have friends everywhere. School board, city council, police department. Not everyone, Ethan countered, thinking of Deputy Tanner, of Rosa Martinez, of the students who'd finally spoken up. True, find those allies. You'll need them. The doctor rose, signaling the end of their meeting. But at the door, he paused. One more thing. Your father's accident. The words hit Ethan like physical blows. His father, Mark Collins, construction foreman, killed in a worksite accident 2 years before his mother's deployment. Scaffolding collapse, broken neck. Another tragic accident in the Collins family history. What about it, he managed. Just look into the job site. Who owned it? Who insured it? Who investigated it? William's eyes held a mixture of sympathy and resignation, the look of a man who'd seen this pattern before. Nothing in Millbrook happens in isolation, son, especially not when it comes to the Collins family. The drive back to the hospital room where Becca was recovering took Ethan past Millbrook High School. Yellow crime scene tape created a garish perimeter around the ruined stadium, fluttering in the Texas wind like surrender flags. Federal agents and windbreakers moved between evidence tents. News crews filmed stand-ups for the evening broadcast, their faces composed into appropriate expressions of small-town shock. None of them knew what Ethan now carried in his mother's old field notebook. The truth about Project Athena, the Mitchell family's three-generation involvement, and the pharmaceutical pipeline that had turned high school athletes into unwitting test subjects for military-grade performance enhancers. But knowledge wasn't proof, and proof was what they needed. Ethan found Becca sitting up in bed, her laptop balanced on a rolling tray, fingers flying over the keyboard with focused intensity. At her side sat Sarah Mitchell, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep, probably both. You shouldn't be here, Ethan told Sarah without preamble. The FBI will be looking for you, your father too. That's why I'm here, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. Dad knows I helped Becca. He'll check everywhere else first. Becca looked up from her screen. Sarah's been telling me about the book. What book? Tyler's notebook, the one he kept all the names in, everyone who's part of the program, everyone who's taking the drugs, everyone who's complicit. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Do you have it? Ethan asked Sarah. She shook her head. Tyler kept it in his locker, but I've seen it. I know what's in it. Names, dates, dosages, side effects. Tyler was more than just a dealer, Ethan. He was tracking results, like it was some kind of science experiment. Because it was, Ethan said grimly. He placed Dr. Williams's folder on the bed beside Becca. Project Athena, military performance enhancement program dating back to Vietnam. Your father's family has been running it for 3 generations. Sarah's face crumpled. I knew he was giving them something. I knew Jack died because of what Dad was doing. But I didn't know, I never thought, that it went all the way to the Pentagon, Ethan finished. That's why they killed our mother. She was building a case against the entire operation. Becca's eyes widened, darting between the folder and her brother. You found proof? Enough to start with. Dr. Williams worked with Mom in Afghanistan. He's been collecting evidence here too, tracking cardiac events in local athletes. Edward Williams, Sarah said, recognition dawning. Dad hates him and called him a fossil who needed to retire. Because he was getting too close, Becca guessed. She turned the laptop toward Ethan, revealing a spreadsheet with dozens of names. Look at this. Every Millbrook championship team for the past 10 years. I've been cross-referencing players against medical records Sarah accessed through her dad's computer. Ethan scanned the data, names, positions, playing statistics, medical events. A pattern emerged, improved performance followed by mysterious health issues. Hospitalizations explained away as dehydration or virus. Players who disappeared from rosters with vague explanations about personal reasons or transfers. 23 deaths, Becca said quietly. All former Millbrook players, all within 5 years of graduation, all from cardiac events or strokes or accidents that happen when you're experiencing a medical emergency while driving. Jesus, Ethan breathed. It gets worse. Sarah pulled up another file on her phone. This was in Dad's email, sent from someone called Hayes, talking about expanding distribution beyond athletic programs. The email detailed plans for introducing modified compounds into civilian markets with military-adjacent demographics, police departments, private security firms, elite fitness communities, projected revenue in the hundreds of millions. They're weaponizing this, Ethan realized, creating dependent users in positions of authority, building an army of enhanced, addicted enforcers. Like Tyler, Becca added, stronger, faster, more aggressive, and completely under control because they need the next dose. The three sat in silence, absorbing the scale of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just about a high school football team anymore. This was about a systematic effort to create chemically enhanced soldiers, starting with teenagers in small-town Texas and expanding outward like a cancer. We need to get this to the FBI, Ethan said finally. Not yet, Becca countered. We need the book first, and we need to know who else is involved locally. The stadium lab was just distribution. Where's the production happening? Who's protecting it? Who knows about Mom? She was right, Ethan realized. Going to the authorities prematurely could alert whoever had ordered Janet Collins's murder. They needed more, concrete evidence that couldn't be dismissed or buried. I know where we can start, Sarah said after a moment. The old gas station on Route 16, the one Jimmy O'Malley runs. What about it? Dad makes Tyler drive out there every Friday night. Always told him not to tell anyone, to park behind the garage where the cameras can't see. I followed them once, before Jack died. Saw them unloading boxes from Jimmy's repair bay into Tyler's truck. Jimmy O'Malley. The name triggered something in Ethan's memory, a grizzled face in old photographs. His father's friend from their army days. The man had been at Mark Collins's funeral, standing apart from the other mourners, watching the proceedings with eyes that missed nothing. Jimmy knew our dad, Ethan said slowly. They served together in Desert Storm. Do you think he's involved? Becca asked. One way to find out. The O'Malley Gas and Service Station sat at the edge of Millbrook, a relic from the days before interstate highways diverted traffic away from small towns. Its faded Texaco sign hadn't been illuminated in decades, but the garage bays remained operational, one of the few places in the county where you could get an older vehicle properly serviced. Ethan parked his truck well back from the main building, positioning it for a quick exit if needed. The weight of his sidearm, retrieved from its lockbox in the truck, pressed reassuringly against his lower back. Stay here, he told Becca, who'd insisted on coming despite his objections. Not a chance, she replied, already maneuvering herself from the passenger seat into her wheelchair. Dad trusted Jimmy. Maybe he had a reason. Ethan clenched his jaw but didn't argue. His sister had earned the right to seek answers alongside him. The garage appeared deserted at first glance. Two vintage Fords sat in various states of restoration, their hoods open like patients awaiting surgery. Tools hung in neat rows along pegboard walls, the ordered workspace of a methodical mind. The air smelled of oil, gasoline, and something else, something chemical and sharp. Jimmy? Ethan called. James O'Malley? Movement from the back office. A shadow in the doorway resolved into a man in his late 60s, barrel-chested and thick-armed despite his age. His face was a topographical map of hard years, deep lines around eyes that had seen too much, a mouth set in the permanent slight frown of the perpetually vigilant. He wore oil-stained coveralls and a Desert Storm veteran's cap pulled low. Well, I'll be damned, Jimmy O'Malley said, his voice gravel over steel. Mark Collins's boy, all grown up and wearing dress blues, and little Becca, too. His eyes tracked to the wheelchair, something like grief flickering across his features. Heard about what happened at the school yesterday. Figured you might show up eventually. You know why we're here? Ethan asked, muscles tensing slightly. I know you're asking questions nobody in this town wants answered. Jimmy wiped his hands on a shop rag, eyes never leaving Ethan's. Questions about your mother. About your father, too, I suspect. About what happened to your sister. About a certain football program and its chemical advantages. Are you part of it? Becca asked directly. Jimmy's laugh was humorless. Part of it, sweetheart. I've been trying to bring it down since before you were born. He gestured toward the office. Come on back. What I need to show you isn't for public viewing. Ethan and Becca exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd expected. But something in Jimmy's demeanor, the way he carried himself, the directness of his gaze, reminded Ethan of the old sergeants who trained him. Men who'd seen the system's darkest corners and developed their own moral codes as a result. The office was spare and functional. Metal desk, filing cabinets, a small refrigerator humming in the corner. Jimmy locked the door behind them, then moved to a calendar hanging on the wall. Behind it was a small safe, which he opened with practiced movements. "Your father gave me this before he died," Jimmy said, removing a flash drive. "Told me to keep it hidden, to wait for the right time. I think that time's now." "What's on it?" Ethan asked. "Evidence. Mark was a construction foreman, but he was also smart as hell and suspicious by nature. When his crew got the contract for the new stadium, he noticed discrepancies in the blueprints, spaces that didn't match the official plans, materials being delivered at night, security measures beyond what a high school would need." Jimmy plugged the drive into an ancient desktop computer. He started documenting everything, taking photos, following paper trails. Eventually, he traced the unusual elements back to Mitchell Construction, Coach Mitchell's brother's company, started asking questions about what they were building under that stadium. The screen filled with image files, construction site photographs, material manifests, architectural drawings with sections highlighted and annotated in Mark Collins's distinctive handwriting. 3 days after he took these, Jimmy continued, pulling up the final set of images, he fell from that scaffolding. Broken neck, dead before the ambulance arrived. The last photo showed a subterranean space, concrete walls, specialized ventilation, reinforced doors with keypad entries, a laboratory hidden beneath what would become the home stands of Millbrook's championship field. "Dad found the lab," Becca whispered, "the same one we were in last night. And it got him killed," Ethan added, the pieces aligning with terrible clarity. Jimmy nodded grimly. "Mark showed me these photos the night before he died. Said he was going to the county inspector in the morning. I told him to be careful, that the Mitchells had connections. But Mark was like you, Ethan, straight arrow. Believed the system would work if you just brought things to light." "What happened after?" Becca asked. "Why didn't you come forward?" Jimmy's face darkened. "I tried, went to Sheriff Reeves with what I knew. Next day, my place got raided for stolen auto parts. Evidence disappeared. Case dismissed for lack of evidence, but the message was clear." "So you've just been watching all this time?" Ethan couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. "Not just watching, son. Documenting. Building my own case. Waiting for the right ally." Jimmy turned to face them fully. "Your mother was that ally. We connected after Mark's funeral. She recognized something wasn't right. Started her own investigation when she deployed, tracing the supply chain from the other end. And they killed her too," Becca said softly. Jimmy's silence was confirmation enough. "But you're still involved with the Mitchells," Ethan pressed. "Sarah said Tyler comes here for deliveries." A thin smile crossed Jimmy's weathered face. "Know your enemy, Marine. I let them think I'm on their payroll. Small-time distributor, occasional mechanic for their vehicles. Lets me track shipments, personnel, connections." He tapped the computer. "Everything goes in the file. Names, dates, quantities. Every dirty cop, every compromised doctor, every kid they've poisoned. You've been building a case," Becca realized, "for 7 years, and now I finally have witnesses." Jimmy looked between them, his expression deadly serious. "What happened at the stadium last night was just the beginning. Mitchell's operation is bigger than Millbrook. He's got labs in 3 counties, distribution networks across 5 states, and protection from people you wouldn't believe." "Like who?" Ethan demanded. Instead of answering directly, Jimmy reached into the safe again and removed a tattered leather notebook. "This might answer that question. It belonged to your father." He handed it to Ethan. "Last page has a name you should recognize. Man named Colonel Robert Hayes. Special Operations, retired now. Runs a private security firm that provides consultants to military operations worldwide." Ethan opened the notebook, flipping to the final entry. His father's handwriting, growing increasingly urgent. "Hayes on site today. Military bearing. Supervising specialized equipment installation. Connected to Richard Jr. somehow. Need to find out what they're building. Why a colonel is involved in a high school stadium." "Colonel Hayes," Ethan repeated, the name triggering recognition. "He was at Mom's funeral. Military attaché, they said. Presented the flag." "Right," Jimmy confirmed. The man who likely ordered your mother's murder came to her funeral to hand you her flag. That's how these people operate. The revelation struck Ethan like physical blows. He'd shaken the man's hand, thanked him for his words about his mother's service. Hayes is still active in Millbrook, Jimmy continued. His security company provides specialized training for the football team, runs background checks on teachers, maintains the security systems at the school. The air quotes were audible in his tone. He's the enforcer, Becca concluded. And he's in town right now, Jimmy confirmed. Arrived this morning, staying at the Millbrook Inn under a company name. My guess is he's here for damage control after last night's exposure. Ethan's mind raced through tactical scenarios. Hayes would be dangerous. Special operations background, private security resources, local allies. Going after him directly would be suicide. We need to find that book, he said finally. Tyler's notebook with all the names. And we need to secure it and all this evidence before Hayes can clean house. The school's crawling with feds, Becca pointed out. How do we get to Tyler's locker? We don't, Jimmy interjected. Tyler kept a backup of everything. Digital copies, stored on a server in his brother's apartment. Kyle Mitchell, Ethan remembered. The older brother, Jimmy nodded. Former quarterback, first test subject of the new formula. Now a permanent addict with a failing heart at 25. Lives in the Pine Creek apartments on the edge of town. Building C, Unit 303. How do you know all this? Becca asked. I'm the one who delivers his medication when Tyler can't. The kid's a mess, too far gone to be useful to them anymore, but knows too much to cut loose. They keep him supplied just enough to stay alive and quiet. A wave of revulsion passed through Ethan, using their own son as a guinea pig, then discarding him when the side effects became too severe. The Mitchells' depravity seemed to know no bounds. We need to move fast, he decided. Hayes won't waste time. Take this, Jimmy said, handing Ethan a key. Southfield, back of my property. Old storm cellar. Your dad and I used it for storage. Reinforced walls, single entrance, easily defendable. If things go sideways, it's a safe house only I know about. The key was heavy in Ethan's palm, solid brass worn with age. Another piece of his father's legacy, preserved by a friend who hadn't forgotten. Why help us? Ethan asked. After all this time hiding, gathering intel, why risk exposure now? Jimmy's eyes grew distant, focusing on something only he could see. When you get to be my age, son, you start tallying up the balance sheet of your life. The things you did versus the things you should have done. I should have done more for your father. Should have insisted he go straight to the feds instead of local authorities. His death is on my conscience. He met Ethan's gaze directly. I'm not making the same mistake twice. Janet Collins picked up her husband's fight. Now her children are doing the same. Third time's the charm, maybe. But this time you won't be fighting alone. As they prepared to leave, Jimmy placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. The gesture of a senior NCO to a junior, weighted with unspoken understanding. One more thing you should know, he said quietly. The scaffolding your father fell from? It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't Mitchell who pushed him. Then who? Your father's notes mention seeing someone else at the site that day. Someone unexpected. Jimmy's expression was grave. William Parker. The mayor, Becca asked, disbelief evident in her voice. Former Millbrook quarterback, state champion, 1982, first generation of test subjects. Now he's the political arm of the operation. Ensures zoning approvals, looks the other way on inspections, keeps the city council in line. Jimmy's voice dropped further. And according to your father's last entry, Parker was arguing with him at the scaffolding site an hour before the accident. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Mayor Parker, with his perfect smile and folksy charm, the man who'd eulogized their father at the funeral, calling him a true son of Millbrook and a pillar of the community. Everyone's involved, Becca whispered. The coach, the mayor, the sheriff, this Colonel Hayes. How do we fight an entire town? Jimmy's smile was grim but determined. One piece of evidence at a time. One ally at a time. Your parents tried to do it alone. Don't make their mistake. As they drove away from the Des Moines station, Ethan glanced in his rearview mirror. Jimmy stood in the garage doorway, watching them go, a solitary figure keeping vigil against approaching shadows. Do you trust him? Becca asked, her voice subdued. Ethan considered the question, weighing the evidence, his instincts, and the mounting revelations of the day. I think he's the first person in this town who's told us the complete truth, he answered finally. And right now, that makes him our best ally. The sun was setting over Millbrook as they drove toward the Pine Creek apartments, casting long shadows across streets that suddenly seemed unfamiliar and hostile. The quaint Texan charm that had defined their hometown now felt like camouflage, a pretty mask hiding rot beneath. Somewhere in that gathering darkness, Colonel Robert Hayes was planning his next move. Mayor Parker was likely mobilizing political defenses. Sheriff Reeves would be containing the investigation, steering it away from certain doors. And the Mitchell family's pharmaceutical empire, built on the broken bodies of high school athletes and protected by the very institutions meant to keep the town safe, was fighting for survival. The battle for Millbrook had entered its second phase, and this time the Collins siblings weren't just fighting for justice, they were fighting for their lives. Pine Creek Apartments had been Millbrook's idea of luxury housing when they were built in the early 1990s. Now they stood as monuments to faded aspirations, beige structures with sagging balconies and air conditioning units that dripped condensation like mechanical tears. Building C sat furthest from the street, partially hidden by scraggly pines that had given the complex its optimistic name. Ethan parked 2 buildings away, habit making him choose a spot with clear sight lines and multiple exit routes. The setting sun cast the buildings in amber light, creating long shadows perfect for concealment. Too perfect. Someone's watching the building, he said quietly, eyes tracking movement on a third-floor balcony of Building B. A figure stood partially concealed by a privacy screen, the faint red glow of a cigarette marking their position. Hayes's people? Becca asked, following his gaze. Maybe, or local police on Mitchell's payroll. Ethan's mind cycled through tactical options. Direct approach was out. Too exposed. Fire alarm would create chaos but alert the watcher. They needed a distraction and an alternate entry point. There, Becca pointed to a maintenance door on the ground level of Building C. Service entrance. Probably leads to the utility core. Ethan nodded, impressed. His sister had always been observant, but her time in the wheelchair had honed that skill to razor sharpness. When you couldn't move quickly, you learned to see everything. Wait here, he told her. I'll check it out and come back for you. No, Becca's voice was steel. We do this together. Mom and Dad tried doing things alone, remember? Besides, no one looks twice at a girl in a wheelchair. I'm your cover. She had a point. Ethan reluctantly agreed, helping her into her chair and positioning his body to shield her from the watcher's line of sight. They moved casually toward Building C, Ethan pushing Becca's wheelchair with the unhurried pace of residents returning home. The maintenance door was locked, as expected, but the electronic keypad showed signs of frequent use, worn numbers on the 1, 3, and 7 keys. Becca pulled out her phone, opening a password-cracking app that Ethan decided not to ask about. 371, she murmured after studying the wear patterns. Standard maintenance code format is date-related. March 1971 would be 371. Let's try that. The keypad beeped acceptance, and the door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, they found a narrow corridor housing electrical panels, water heaters, and cable distribution boxes. The air was hot and still, smelling of dust and ozone. Elevator shaft should be straight ahead, Becca whispered, and there should be a service elevator, or stairs for maintenance. They located the service elevator, a small industrial lift designed for moving appliances and tools between floors. Unlike the main elevators, this one required no keycard. Ethan helped Becca inside, then punched the button for the 3rd floor. The elevator rose with a mechanical groan that seemed thunderous in the confined space. The 3rd floor service corridor was identical to the ground level, except for numbered access doors that presumably led to each apartment's utility connections. They moved silently past 301, 302, and stopped at 303. Ethan pressed his ear to the apartment's main door, listening for movement inside. Nothing. He motioned for Becca to stay back, then retrieved a small toolkit from his pocket, another item he'd rather not explain owning. 30 seconds later, the door swung open. The smell hit them first. Unwashed bodies, rotting food, chemical undertones that made Ethan's combat instincts fire warning signals. The apartment was dark, blinds drawn against the fading daylight. Takeout containers and empty energy drink cans created an obstacle course across the living room floor. In the corner, a complex computer setup hummed, multiple monitors displaying screensavers of Millbrook football victories. "Kyle?" Becca called softly. "Kyle Mitchell?" A sound from the bedroom, shuffling, then a thump. Ethan moved instantly, positioning himself between Becca and the potential threat, hand moving to his concealed sidearm. The bedroom door opened slowly. Kyle Mitchell emerged, and Ethan barely recognized him from the local newspaper photos of the former quarterback who'd led Millbrook to 3 consecutive state championships. The young man before them was a wraith, skeletal frame swimming in a Millbrook Mavericks sweatshirt, skin sallow and papery, eyes sunken into dark hollows. His hands trembled visibly, and a sheen of sweat covered his forehead, despite the room's chill. "You're not Tyler," Kyle slurred, pupils constricted to pinpoints. "Where's Tyler? He was supposed to bring my medicine 2 days ago." "Tyler's gone, Kyle," Becca said gently. "There was an incident at the school. The lab under the stadium was destroyed." Kyle's face contorted in panic. "Gone? No, no, no. He can't be gone. I need my treatment. Dad promised. He promised he'd always take care of me." His breathing accelerated and he clutched at his chest. "It hurts when I don't get it. Hurts inside, like my bones are trying to escape." Ethan recognized the signs of severe withdrawal. Whatever cocktail of performance enhancers and addictive compounds the Mitchells had been giving their son, the dependence was profound. "We'll help you, Kyle," Ethan said, keeping his voice calm and authoritative, the tone he'd used with shell-shocked Marines. "But first, we need information. Tyler's records, the book, the server backups, where does he keep them?" Kyle's eyes darted between them, calculation warring with desperation. "Who are you?" "I'm Rebecca Collins. This is my brother Ethan. Our mom was Janet Collins." Recognition flickered across Kyle's ravaged features. "The nurse, the one who was asking questions. Dad said she was a problem." His gaze fixed on Becca's wheelchair. "And you? You're the girl Tyler pushed, the one who was taking pictures at the stadium construction." "Yes," Becca confirmed. "Your brother tried to kill me because I was getting too close. Just like your father killed our mother because she discovered what he was doing." Kyle slumped against the wall, legs seemingly unable to support him. "I told them it was wrong. Back when they first started testing the new formula on me. I told them the side effects were too severe." He gestured at his wasted body. "Look at me, 25 years old and my heart functions at 40% capacity. My liver is failing. My brain, sometimes I can't remember my own name." "You were the prototype," Ethan realized. "Patient zero for the modified Athena compound." A bitter laugh escaped Kyle's cracked lips. Dear old dad needed proof of concept before marketing to the military contractors. What better test subject than his own son? State championship quarterback with all the right physical attributes and complete loyalty to the family legacy. His voice cracked on the last word. 5 years of glory, followed by a lifetime of hell. "The records, Kyle," Becca pressed gently. "We need them to stop this from happening to more people." Kyle's gaze drifted to the computer setup. "Everything's there. Tyler backs up his book every night. Dosage records, performance metrics, side effect reports. Names of everyone involved appeared, from players to suppliers to protection." His trembling increased. "Dad doesn't know Tyler keeps copies. Insurance, he called it, in case Dad ever decided he was expendable too." Ethan moved to the computer, finding it password protected. "What's the login?" "State Champs 2019. No spaces." The system unlocked, revealing folders meticulously organized by year, team, and individual player. Tyler's digital record-keeping was obsessive and comprehensive. Spreadsheets tracking performance metrics before and after treatment, medical observations, psychological changes. One folder simply labeled Athena contained what appeared to be original research documents, chemical formulas, trial results, military applications. "This is everything," Becca breathed, scanning the files. "The entire operation, documented from the beginning, enough to take down not just the Mitchells, but the whole network." "Copy it," Ethan ordered, inserting a thumb drive from his pocket. All of it. As the files transferred, Kyle slid down the wall to sit on the floor, his breathing becoming more labored. There's something else you should know, he managed between gasps. About your dad. Ethan froze. What about him? He wasn't just investigating the stadium construction. He found one of the first test sites, an old storm shelter on the edge of Mitchell property, where they perfected the formula before scaling up production. Kyle's eyes closed briefly as if the effort of remembering caused physical pain. That's why he had to go. He found the bodies. Bodies? Becca's voice was barely audible. Early test subjects, local vagrants mostly, people no one would miss. Some didn't survive the initial trials. Dad buried them beneath the shelter floor. 15, maybe 20 of them. Kyle opened his eyes, sudden clarity shining through the haze of withdrawal. Your father took photos, evidence. That's when Mayor Parker called my dad. That's when they decided Mark Collins had to have an accident. The revelation landed like artillery fire, devastating in its impact. Their father hadn't just stumbled upon an illegal lab. He'd discovered mass murder, experimentation on unwilling human subjects, the kind of atrocity that went beyond corruption into the realm of war crimes. Where is this shelter? Ethan demanded. Old Palmer Road, where it dead ends at the Mitchell property line. Looks abandoned now. They moved operations after your dad's accident. Too compromised. Kyle's head lolled forward, but they left the bodies. Too risky to move them. The file transfer completed with a soft chime. Ethan pocketed the thumb drive, mind racing through implications. They now had evidence of illegal drug manufacturing, distribution to minors, multiple homicides, and a conspiracy that reached from Millbrook to military contractors. Enough to destroy everyone involved, which made them the most hunted people in Texas. We need to go, he told Becca. Now, if Hayes's people are watching the building, they'll check here eventually. What about Kyle? Becca asked, concern evident despite everything. Ethan assessed the former quarterback's deteriorating condition. Withdrawal symptoms were accelerating. Without medical intervention, he might not survive the night. Hospital, he decided. Anonymous drop-off. They can treat the withdrawal symptoms, get him stabilized. It wasn't justice, but it was mercy, something the Mitchells had never shown their elder son. Kyle's hollow laugh stopped him. Won't work. Dad owns the hospital administrator. They'll recognize me. They'll call him. He'll have me transferred to a private facility for specialized care, never to be seen again. Then where? Becca demanded. We can't just leave you like this. Kyle's gaze drifted to a framed photo on his cluttered coffee table. Himself in a Millbrook uniform, arm around an elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap. Jimmy O'Malley, he helped me once before when I tried to get clean. Has medical training from his Army days. Knows how to manage withdrawal without reporting it. Jimmy, Ethan repeated, surprised. You trust him? More than my own family, Kyle confirmed. He's been the only one who ever tried to help me without wanting something in return. Decision made, Ethan helped Kyle to his feet. The former athlete weighed almost nothing, his once powerful frame now a collection of bones held together by failing organs and fading memories of glory. They used the service elevator again, emerging into the gathering darkness with Kyle supported between them. The watcher's balcony was now empty, either shift change or repositioning. Either way, they had minutes at most before discovery. They had nearly reached Ethan's truck when headlights swept the parking lot, a black SUV with tinted windows moving slowly between the buildings. Government issue, but without markings. The kind of vehicle that appeared in war zones without official acknowledgement. Hayes, Ethan muttered, ducking behind a parked car and pulling Becca and Kyle down with him. Military precision, timed patrol patterns. The SUV paused at each building entrance, its occupants invisible behind tinted glass. When it reached Building C, the driver's window lowered slightly. A hand emerged, holding something that caught the streetlight's glow. A directional microphone sweeping the area for conversations. They're scanning, Ethan whispered, looking for us specifically. How do you know? Becca asked. Because that's what I would do if I were hunting high-value targets. They remained motionless as the SUV completed its patrol and disappeared around the corner. The moment it was out of sight, Ethan moved, half carrying Kyle toward the truck, while Becca wheeled herself alongside. We have minutes before they circle back, he said, lifting Kyle into the back seat. Stay low. If they have night vision, they'll spot body heat signatures. They pulled out of the complex just as the SUV reappeared in Ethan's rearview mirror. He drove exactly at the speed limit, taking the first right turn and then an immediate left. Basic counter-surveillance driving techniques that wouldn't fool professionals for long, but might buy precious minutes. Call Jimmy, he told Becca. Tell him we're coming and that we're bringing company. Jimmy O'Malley's property lay 5 miles outside Millbrook proper, 10 acres of scrubby Texas landscape dotted with live oaks and mesquite. The main house was set back from the road, a modest ranch-style structure that had seen better decades. Behind it stood a large metal workshop where Jimmy restored classic cars as both hobby and cover for his real activities. They approached with lights off, using the rutted dirt driveway that wound through trees, providing natural concealment. Jimmy was waiting on the porch, shotgun resting casually across his knees, the ember of his cigarette glowing like a tiny beacon. Heard you found trouble, he called softly as they pulled up. Trouble found us, Ethan replied, helping Kyle from the back seat, and we brought some back with us. Jimmy's weathered face registered no surprise at Kyle Mitchell's condition. Withdrawal, he assessed clinically, probably 72 hours in, cardiovascular distress, dehydration. He stood, gesturing toward the house. Bring him inside. I've got a room set up. The interior of Jimmy's home reflected the man himself, utilitarian, organized, and prepared for contingencies. Gun safes stood in corners. Topographical maps of the county covered one wall, marked with notations only Jimmy would understand. A ham radio setup occupied a desk near the kitchen, its dials glowing green in the dimness. The room Jimmy had prepared was more medical bay than bedroom. Hospital bed, IV stands, monitoring equipment that looked military-grade rather than civilian. Desert Storm Field Hospital surplus, Jimmy explained, noting Ethan's raised eyebrow. Been collecting for years. Never know when you might need to treat someone off the books. He worked efficiently, establishing IV access in Kyle's arm and hanging fluids with practice movements. Saline for dehydration, anti-seizure meds for when the tremors get worse, pain management that won't suppress respiratory function. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Won't be pretty, but he'll live. You've done this before, Becca observed, with withdrawal patients. Jimmy's expression hardened. 7 Millbrook players in the last decade. Boys who wanted out of the program but couldn't handle cold turkey. Most went back eventually. The addiction's too strong, and the Mitchells make sure there's no other supply source. But you help them anyway, Ethan said. Someone has to. Jimmy finished stabilizing Kyle, then stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel. He'll sleep now. Medication will keep him comfortable for a few hours. That gives us time to talk about what you found. They gathered around Jimmy's kitchen table, where Ethan connected the thumb drive to an ancient laptop that, he suspected, had never been online. Impossible to hack, impossible to trace. Kyle's brother kept records of everything, Becca explained as the files loaded. Players, dosages, side effects. The entire operation, documented like a scientific study. That matches what I've seen, Jimmy confirmed. The Mitchells approach this like research, not just dealing. Each player is a data point. Each side effect a variable to control for in the next iteration. But why, Ethan asked. Why risk using high school students as test subjects? Because they're perfect laboratory specimens, Jimmy replied grimly. Young, healthy, physically active, regular medical checkups through the school, controlled environment, constant performance metrics from games and practices, and most importantly, Bun, his voice hardened, they'll do anything to win, to get that scholarship, to be heroes in a town that worships football above all else. And the military connection? Becca pressed. This Colonel Hayes? Jimmy's eyes darted to the windows, checking for threats despite the remote location. Robert Hayes, Special Forces, then Delta. Ran black operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, places they don't name in briefings. Now he heads a private military contractor called Meridian Security Solutions. On paper, they provide security services to government installations. In reality, they're a cutout for operations the Pentagon wants deniable distance from, and Hayes wants the Athena formula, Ethan guessed. Not wants, has. The Mitchells have been supplying him for years. What they perfect in Millbrook gets deployed in conflict zones worldwide. Meridian's contractors are known for operating longer, fighting harder, showing unusual pain tolerance. Jimmy's voice dropped. They're also known for excessive violence, psychological instability, and high post-deployment suicide rates. Just like the Millbrook players, Becca whispered. Enhanced performance followed by physical and mental collapse. Exactly. Except the military doesn't call them tragedies or accidents. They're just operational losses. Acceptable casualties. Ethan felt cold fury building as the picture clarified. His mother had died trying to expose this. American contractors being dosed with experimental compounds, turning them into chemical weapons that eventually self-destructed. His father had died discovering the human cost of perfecting those compounds. His sister had nearly died for getting too close to the production facility. And now they had the evidence to bring it all crashing down. We need to get this to federal authorities, he said, indicating the thumb drive. Not local, not state, someone beyond Mitchell's reach. DEA has a field office in San Antonio, Jimmy suggested. Agent Catherine Rodriguez. She's been investigating suspicious pharmaceutical shipments along the border. Doesn't know about Millbrook specifically, but she's been circling the wider operation. Can you contact her? Becca asked. Jimmy nodded. Secure channel through an old army buddy, but not from here. Hayes will have surveillance on all known communication methods. We need to move locations first. The storm cellar you mentioned, Ethan recalled. Dad's safe house. Better than that, Jimmy corrected. Mark had a fallback plan if things went sideways. Old hunting cabin on the west edge of my property, off-grid, solar panels, satellite communication setup, stocked with supplies. He called it his insurance policy. Ethan and Becca exchanged glances. Another piece of their father they'd never known. The careful, paranoid side that had seen danger coming and prepared accordingly. What about Kyle? Becca asked, gesturing toward the bedroom where the former quarterback now slept fitfully. He stays here, Jimmy decided. Too unstable to move. I'll keep him sedated and monitored. Hayes won't look here immediately. He thinks I'm still on Mitchell's payroll. By the time he figures out differently, you'll have reached Rodriguez. A plan was taking shape, but Ethan's tactical mind identified a critical vulnerability. The storm shelter Kyle mentioned, the one with the bodies. We need that evidence too. Too dangerous, Jimmy objected. It's on Mitchell property, probably under surveillance. It's also the physical evidence that turns this from a drug case into mass murder, Ethan countered. Without it, they could claim the records are falsified, that it's all a setup. He's right, Becca reluctantly agreed. We need photographs at minimum, soil samples if possible, enough to justify exhumation orders. Jimmy considered this, his expression calculating. There's a back approach through Willow Creek. Used to hunt there as a kid, comes up behind the shelter, through woods Mitchell probably doesn't watch as carefully. I'll go, Ethan decided. Tonight, while Hayes is focused on Kyle's apartment and the hospital. Not alone, Becca insisted. Yes, alone, Ethan countered firmly. You're the only one who fully understands the chemical data. If something happens to me, you need to be able to explain everything to Rodriguez. He held up a hand to forestall her objection. This isn't overprotection, Becca. It's tactical resource allocation. You're more valuable to the mission at the cabin with the digital evidence. The logic was sound, and Becca reluctantly nodded. Fine, but you take Jimmy's best camera, and you're back by dawn, no heroics. Agreed. Jimmy rose, moving to a cabinet that opened to reveal an impressive array of equipment. Cameras with night vision capabilities, sample collection kits, GPS units. The old veteran selected items with practiced efficiency, assembling a go-bag that would have impressed Ethan's Force Recon instructors. One more thing, Jimmy said, unlocking a gun safe and removing a Colt 1911 that showed Troy's signs of extensive use but immaculate maintenance. Your father's. He left it with me after the threat started. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it for you. Ethan accepted the weapon, feeling its familiar weight. Mark Collins had taught him to shoot with this very pistol, standing behind him at the range outside town, adjusting his stance with patient hands. 7-round magazine, Jimmy continued, handing over additional ammunition. Plus one in the chamber. Not modern capacity, but reliable as sunrise. While Jimmy prepared supplies for the cabin, Ethan checked on Kyle. The former quarterback slept restlessly, his damaged body fighting battles on multiple fronts. Withdrawal, organ failure, the aftermath of years of chemical abuse. Becca sat beside him, her face set in the determined expression that reminded Ethan so much of their mother. He was just like the others, she said quietly, a kid who wanted to be special, to make his town proud, to please his father. And they used that against him, Ethan agreed, anger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Like they used it against all of them. We can't save them all, Becca acknowledged. Some are already gone. Some, like Kyle, might never fully recover. But we can stop it from happening to others, Ethan finished her thought. We can make their sacrifices mean something. A noise from the front of the house interrupted them, the distinctive crunch of tires on gravel. Jimmy appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand, expression grim. Vehicle approaching. No headlights. Ethan moved instantly to the window, staying to the side to avoid being silhouetted. A dark sedan was making its way slowly up the driveway, its progress deliberate and measuring. Not the black SUV from the apartment complex, but something equally purposeful. Hayes? Becca whispered. No, Jimmy's voice was tight. Worse. That's Sheriff Reeves's personal vehicle. If he's here without lights or backup, he's not here officially, Ethan finished. He's here to clean up loose ends. Law decision made in microseconds, Ethan moved to the back door. Get Becca and the evidence to the cabin. I'll lead him away, then circle back to the storm shelter. 2 birds, 1 stone. Ethan, Becca began. No time to argue. This is what I'm trained for. He checked his father's pistol, the familiar action centering him. Trust me, I'll meet you at the cabin by dawn. Before she could protest further, he slipped into the Texas night, becoming one with the shadows that had once concealed his enemies and now offered him the same protection. Behind him, Jimmy was already moving Becca toward a concealed ATV parked behind the workshop. The battle for Millbrook had entered its most dangerous phase. The truth about Project Athena, about the Mitchell family's decades of crimes, about the military's complicity in using American teenagers as laboratory subjects, it was all contained in a thumb drive and a storm shelter. And Ethan Collins, Marine, son, brother, was the only thing standing between that truth and those who would bury it forever. The night embraced him as he moved through familiar territory, the Texas landscape of his childhood now transformed into a battlefield where the stakes were his family's legacy and the lives of countless future victims. Some wars were fought for country. This one was fought for justice. And like his parents before him, Ethan was prepared to risk everything to win it. Darkness had fully claimed the Texas landscape as Ethan moved through familiar terrain made foreign by circumstance. The moon hung low and full, casting silver light across scrubby mesquite and live oak, beauty that now concealed potential threats. Every shadow might hide one of Hayes's operatives. Every rustle of nighttime creatures could mask the approach of Sheriff Reeves's deputies. He'd circled wide around Jimmy's property, watching as Reeves's sedan idled in the driveway for 11 agonizing minutes before departing. The sheriff hadn't approached the house, just watched, assessing, perhaps communicating with others in the hunt. The gesture was clear. I know where you are. I'm watching. Your time is running out. Now Ethan moved with purpose toward the old Palmer Road, following Jimmy's hastily sketched map. The storm shelter, and its grim contents, lay 2 miles across Mitchell property, accessible through a creek bed that provided both concealment and minimal evidence of passage. The weight of his father's Colt 1911 at his hip was both comfort and grim reminder of the stakes. This land had once been his playground, weekend hunting trips with his father, summer afternoons exploring creek beds for arrowheads and fossils. Now it was hostile territory, owned by people who had murdered his parents and tried to kill his sister. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd survived 18 months in Afghanistan only to find the real war waiting at home. Willow Creek appeared as a darker line cutting through the landscape, its water low after weeks of Texas drought. Ethan descended the embankment carefully, using natural cover to mask his movement. The creek bed would lead him directly behind the storm shelter, If Jimmy's intelligence was correct, the silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional nightjar call or distant coyote. Too quiet, his combat instincts warned. The Texas night should be louder. Frogs, insects, the rustle of nocturnal creatures. The absence suggested disturbance, recent human activity. He paused, listening intently. Nothing. Then, faint but distinct, the click of a radio transmission. Standard procedure. Operators communicate status at regular intervals. Somewhere ahead, professional surveillance was in place. Ethan adjusted his approach, slowing his pace, placing each foot with deliberate care to minimize sound. The creek bed deepened, providing better cover but more difficult footing. He kept his profile low, moving like the predator his marine training had shaped him to be. Rounding a bend in the creek, he caught his first glimpse of the storm shelter. A concrete bunker half buried in the side of a low hill, its entrance facing away from the creek. A relic from the Cold War era when rural Texans built fallout shelters against Soviet threats that never materialized. Now it housed evidence of a different kind of war. One fought with chemicals instead of radiation, targeting America's youth rather than its military. Two men in dark clothing stood near the entrance. Their posture and positioning identified them immediately as professionals. Military backgrounds, private sector now. Meridian security operatives. Hayes's people. They carried sidearms and what appeared to be compact submachine guns. Excessive firepower for a simple guard detail. Ethan assessed options. Frontal approach was suicide. Waiting carried its own risks. Dawn would eliminate his concealment advantage. The evidence inside that bunker might already be compromised or in process of removal. He needed to act, but with precision. Moving further upstream, he located what he needed, a natural drainage channel cutting perpendicular to the creek, providing a covered approach to the rear of the shelter. He followed it slowly, using elbows and knees to minimize his silhouette, the technique identical to approaching enemy positions in Helmand Province. The drainage channel ended 20 yards from the shelter's rear wall. Between lay open ground, moonlit and exposed, Ethan watched the guards' patrol pattern. Predictable intervals, poor coordination. They hadn't been positioned for serious defense, but rather to alert others if anyone approached. That suggested the main force was elsewhere, perhaps at the Mitchell estate or hunting Becca. Timing the guards' movements, Ethan picked his moment and crossed the open ground in a controlled sprint, reaching the shelter's rear wall without detection. The concrete was old, weathered by decades of Texas seasons, but solid. No rear entrance. He would need to neutralize the guards to access the front. Patient as a stalking cougar, Ethan worked his way around the shelter's perimeter, staying in its shadow. One guard remained by the entrance while the other patrolled the area in a loose figure-8 pattern. Predictable, exploitable. When the patrol brought the second guard to the darkest corner of the shelter, Ethan moved. His hand clamped over the guard's mouth while his other arm applied precise pressure to the carotid artery, a blood choke that rendered the man unconscious in seconds. He lowered the limp form silently to the ground, secured the weapons, and used the guard's own zip ties to bind his wrists and ankles. One down, one remaining. The second guard realized something was wrong when his partner failed to reappear. He keyed his radio, speaking quietly. "Jackson, check in." Silence. "Jackson, radio check." More silence. The guard drew his sidearm and moved cautiously toward where his partner had last been seen, exactly as training would dictate, and exactly as Ethan had anticipated. The takedown was swift and silent, the same chokehold, the same careful lowering to the ground, the same restraints. In under 2 minutes, both guards were secured without a shot fired. Ethan collected their radios, weapons, and key cards before approaching the shelter entrance. The heavy steel door bore a modern electronic lock that contrasted with the bunker's age, recently installed, requiring both key card and numeric code. Ethan tried the card taken from the senior guard, then hesitated at the keypad. Wrong code would trigger alarms. Standard procedure would be, he studied the keypad, like the one at Kyle's apartment building. Certain numbers showed more wear. 2, 5, 7, and 9. 4 digits, possibly a date. The Mitchell family operated on legacy, sentimentality. He tried 1975, the year Millbrook won its first state championship under Coach Mitchell's father. The lock clicked open. Inside, emergency lighting cast the shelter in sickly green illumination, revealing a space transformed from its original purpose. Gone were the Cold War-era provisions and cots. In their place stood stainless steel tables, medical equipment, and chemical storage units. The walls were lined with filing cabinets. One corner held a sophisticated computer setup similar to the one in Kyle's apartment. But it was the floor that drew Ethan's attention. The original concrete had been broken up in the center of the room, exposing the earth beneath. Recently disturbed earth, in a rough rectangle approximately 6 feet by 3 feet, a grave-size excavation. They're removing the evidence, Ethan realized. The bodies Kyle had mentioned, they were being relocated, erasing the final proof of the Mitchell family's earliest crimes. He moved quickly, retrieving Jimmy's camera and photographing everything: the disturbed earth, the medical equipment, the filing cabinets. He collected soil samples from the excavation, securing them in evidence containers from the kit Jimmy had provided. Then he turned his attention to the filing cabinets. The drawers contained handwritten records dating back to 1981, the earliest experiments with performance-enhancing compounds, meticulously documented by Dr. Richard Mitchell Sr. The initial subjects were unnamed, referred to only by numbers. Their reactions, recorded in clinical language, told a horrifying story. Subject 4 exhibited extreme aggression, followed by cardiac arrest 27 hours after administration. Subject 9 developed renal failure, paranoid delusions, expired after 83 hours. Subject 14 showed promising endurance improvements before cerebral hemorrhage on day 5. Human experimentation without consent. Casualties dismissed as data points. The foundation upon which the Mitchell Empire and Millbrook's championship legacy had been built. The later files showed the evolution of the program, refinement of compounds, expansion to the high school team, careful monitoring of volunteer subjects, teenage boys whose consent had been manufactured through promises of glory, scholarship opportunities, and hometown adoration. Ethan photographed key pages, focusing on signatures, dates, and the most damning entries. The evidence was overwhelming: decades of systematic abuse, exploitation, and cover-up, all sanctioned by Millbrook's most prominent family and protected by its institutions. He had just finished when one of the confiscated radios crackled to life. "Perimeter team, status check." Silence as the base waited for a response that wouldn't come. Then more urgently, "Jackson Rivera, report immediately." Time was up. Discovery was imminent. Ethan gathered the evidence samples and camera, did a final sweep for anything crucial, then slipped out the shelter door, securing it behind him to buy time. The guards remained unconscious, their weapons now disabled and hidden in the underbrush. He headed for the creek bed, moving with controlled urgency. He'd covered half the distance when vehicle headlights appeared on the access road leading to the shelter, at least 2 SUVs moving fast, their beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Behind him, the radio squawked again. "All units converge on the shelter. Intruder confirmed. Secure the site." Ethan reached the creek and plunged in, using its course for concealment as he put distance between himself and the approaching vehicles. Behind him, voices shouted commands. Flashlight beams swept the area. The night erupted with the controlled chaos of a professional search operation. He moved downstream at a steady pace, using the water to mask his trail and the overhanging willows for cover. The pursuit sounds gradually faded, suggesting they were focusing their search around the shelter rather than assuming he'd already escaped. It bought him precious minutes. 2 miles downstream, Ethan left the creek bed and oriented himself toward the coordinates Jimmy had provided for the hunting cabin. The Texas landscape opened before him, rolling hills dotted with oak mottes, ranching country that had changed little in a century despite the modern corruption that now infected its communities. Dawn was approaching when he spotted the cabin, a small, weathered structure nestled against a limestone outcropping, almost invisible against the natural backdrop. No light showed, but a thin wisp of smoke from the chimney indicated occupancy. Ethan approached cautiously, using the recognition signal Jimmy had specified. 3 short whistles followed by 2 long ones, the call of a whippoorwill modified slightly. The cabin door opened, revealing Jimmy's silhouette, shotgun still at the ready. "Cutting it close, Marine," the older man said by way of greeting. "Got delayed by company," Ethan replied, entering the cabin and securing the door behind him. The interior was sparse but functional, wooden table and chairs, stone fireplace, narrow cots along one wall. A generator hummed softly in the corner, powering communications equipment that looked military-grade despite its age. Becca sat at the table, her wheelchair positioned beside a laptop where she'd been analyzing the data from Kyle's thumb drive. "You're hurt," she said immediately, noticing the way Ethan favored his right side. "Bruised ribs. Nothing serious." He downplayed the injuries sustained while taking down the second guard. "More importantly, I found the shelter and evidence." He placed the camera and soil samples on the table. "They're removing the bodies, but they haven't finished. There's still trace evidence, documentation, equipment." "Hayes is cleaning house," Jimmy observed grimly, "removing anything that can't be explained away." "Which means he's worried," Becca concluded. "They wouldn't take these risks unless they felt truly threatened." She connected the camera to the laptop, downloading the photographs. As the images appeared on screen, her expression hardened. "My God, it's worse than we thought." The photographs told a story too horrific for words. A makeshift laboratory where human beings had been treated as experimental animals. Their suffering documented with clinical detachment. Their deaths recorded as mere data points in the pursuit of chemical enhancement. "The Mitchells started by targeting the vulnerable," Ethan explained, pointing to entries in the earliest logs. "Homeless people, drifters, then moved on to local athletes once they refined the formula enough to minimize immediate fatalities. And eventually to military contractors," Jimmy added, his weathered face grim. "Mercenaries who wouldn't question what they were taking as long as it made them stronger, faster, more aggressive." Hayes provided both markets, Becca concluded. The military connection for distribution and the political protection to keep it hidden. She turned to a different screen, where she'd organized the data from Kyle's drive into a comprehensive case file. "I've been mapping the network based on Tyler's records. It's extensive. 5 states, dozens of high schools, military contractor connections in 3 countries." "And you've connected all this to Agent Rodriguez?" Ethan asked. Jimmy nodded. "Made contact through secure channels last night. She's been investigating a pharmaceutical smuggling operation along the border. Mexican labs producing synthetic compounds for North American distribution. She didn't know about the Mitchell connection or the military angle, but she's been tracking the money for months." "Where is she now?" "En route from San Antonio. ETA 3 hours. Bringing a specialized task force, DEA, FBI, military investigators." Jimmy checked his watch. "Until then, we hold position. This cabin doesn't appear on any property records. Mark made sure of that. As long as we maintain communications discipline, we should be secure." Ethan wasn't so certain. Hayes had resources, experience, and the desperation of a man facing exposure of crimes that would bring the harshest federal penalties. The storm shelter discovery would accelerate his timeline. "We should assume he knows about this place," Ethan said, military caution overriding optimism. "If he's connected to military intelligence, he'll have access to satellite imagery, property records, even Mark couldn't completely hide. Thermal detection capability." "Already considered that?" Jimmy responded, gesturing to a ham radio setup in the corner. "Been broadcasting misleading communications, making it look like we're heading for the state line. Set up false heat signatures half a mile east to draw any thermal scanning." Ethan nodded, impressed. The old veteran hadn't survived this long by being careless. "While we wait for Rodriguez, we should review everything," Becca suggested. "Organize the evidence for maximum impact. Make sure nothing gets overlooked or explained away." They worked methodically, Becca categorizing digital records while Ethan and Jimmy integrated the physical evidence. The case they built was devastating: systematic exploitation of teenagers, illegal pharmaceutical production, human experimentation, murder, and a cover-up that implicated Millbrook's entire power structure. "Mayor Parker's involvement goes deeper than we thought," Becca noted, reviewing financial records. "His construction company laundered money for the operation. Sheriff Reeves provided protection and helped dispose of evidence. Judge Mitchell, Tyler's grandfather, ensured any legal challenges were dismissed. An entire town built on corruption," Jimmy said softly, "using its children as lab rats to perfect drugs for military contractors. And killing anyone who got too close to the truth," Ethan added, thinking of his parents, of Jack Thompson, of how close Becca had come to joining them. The sun had fully risen when Jimmy's perimeter alarm, a simple but effective system of tripwires connected to silent indicators, signaled movement on the eastern approach. All three froze, instantly alert. Could be wildlife, Jimmy said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Ethan moved to the window using field glasses to scan the terrain. The morning light revealed a disturbing sight, multiple figures moving through the trees with tactical precision. Dark clothing, military-style weapons, professional spacing and signals. Hayes's people, he confirmed. At least 6 that I can see. Likely more behind them. How did they find us? Becca asked, already packing the evidence into a waterproof case. Doesn't matter, Jimmy replied, checking his shotgun. What matters is getting you two and that evidence to Rodriguez. He moved to a concealed panel in the floor, revealing a narrow passage. Emergency exit, leads to a drainage culvert, then to the back property line. There's an old Jeep hidden in the brush, keys in the ignition. Head straight for Highway 83, then north to the rendezvous point. What about you? Ethan demanded, recognizing the old soldier's intention. Jimmy's weathered face creased in a grim smile. Someone has to convince them you're still here. Buy you time. He handed Becca a satellite phone. Secure line to Rodriguez. She's expecting your call at the rendezvous. Jimmy, no, Becca protested. We're not leaving you to face them alone. This isn't a debate, young lady. Jimmy's voice carried the unmistakable authority of a combat veteran who'd made peace with mortality long ago. Your parents died trying to expose this. Your evidence completes their mission. Nothing's more important than getting it to Rodriguez. Ethan recognized the tactical soundness of the plan, even as he hated its necessity. How long can you hold them? Long enough. Jimmy checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. This old dog still has a few tricks. Now move. They'll have the cabin surrounded in minutes. The decision was tactically clear but emotionally wrenching. Ethan helped Becca into the narrow passage, handed down the evidence case, then turned to Jimmy one last time. Thank you, he said simply, the words inadequate for the sacrifice they both knew was coming. Jimmy clasped his shoulder briefly. Your father was my brother in all but blood, which makes you family too. His eyes held a lifetime of hard choices and no regrets. Now go finish what they started. Ethan descended into the passage, securing the panel behind him. The tunnel was low and narrow, requiring them to move single file, Ethan pulling Becca's wheelchair behind them while she used her arms to propel herself forward. The earthen walls pressed close, bringing uncomfortable echoes of combat tunnels in Afghanistan. They'd covered perhaps 50 yards when the first gunshots erupted above them. The distinctive crack of Jimmy's shotgun, followed by the controlled bursts of military-grade weapons. The firefight was brief but intense. Then silence, more ominous than the chaos that had preceded it. Keep moving, Ethan urged when Becca hesitated, her face reflecting the grief they both felt but couldn't yet process. Make it count. The tunnel ended at a rusted culvert concealed by years of vegetation growth. They emerged into the bright Texas morning, the peaceful landscape in obscene contrast to the violence they'd left behind. As promised, an old Willys Jeep, Korean War vintage by the look of it, sat hidden among cedar trees, its olive-drab paint blending with the foliage. Ethan helped Becca into the passenger seat, stowed her wheelchair in the back, and checked the vehicle quickly. The keys hung from the ignition as promised. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. More importantly, a military-style go bag sat on the rear seat, containing water, emergency rations, first aid supplies, and additional ammunition for the Colt 1911. Jimmy had prepared for everything except his own survival. The Jeep started on the first try, its engine surprisingly quiet for its age, another of Jimmy's modifications. Ethan navigated carefully along an overgrown trail that eventually connected to a dirt road leading away from the property. In the rearview mirror, smoke rose from the direction of the cabin, whether from the firefight or deliberate destruction, he couldn't tell. He knew this was coming, Becca said quietly, clutching the evidence case in her lap. He planned for it. Yes, Ethan agreed, understanding the old veteran's mindset with painful clarity. He was always going to make the stand, from the moment Dad died. They reached the highway without incident, turning north toward the coordinates Jimmy had provided for the rendezvous with Agent Rodriguez. The morning traffic was light, occasional ranchers' trucks, school buses beginning their routes, normal life continuing while their world had been shattered. 10 miles north, Ethan spotted what he'd been trained to recognize. A surveillance vehicle positioned at a highway pullout, seemingly innocuous but perfectly placed to monitor passing traffic. Two men inside, too alert for civilians, too still for travelers. Hayes has the roads watched, he informed Becca, not slowing or giving any indication he'd noticed. They'll report the Jeep. Options? She asked, her voice steady despite the danger. Ethan considered their position. The rendezvous point was still 15 miles ahead. The highway offered no cover. Leaving the main road would make them easier to intercept. They needed to continue forward but change their profile. 2 miles further, he spotted what he needed, a roadside diner with attached gas station, its parking lot half full with morning customers. He pulled in casually, parking among other vehicles. Wait here, he instructed, retrieving a small toolkit from beneath the seat, another of Jimmy's careful preparations. Working quickly but without drawing attention, Ethan removed the Jeep's military-style canvas top, folding it into the rear compartment. From the go bag, he retrieved a faded University of Texas windbreaker and baseball cap, which he put on over his clothes. The transformation was simple but effective. The open Jeep now looked like a recreational vehicle rather than a tactical transport, and Ethan like a college sports fan rather than a Marine. They'll be looking for a covered military Jeep with a male driver, he explained, returning to the driver's seat. Now we're an open civilian Jeep with what appears to be a couple heading for a day trip. Becca nodded approval, understanding the strategy. Basic counter surveillance. Change the silhouette. Exactly. And we need one more element. Ethan entered the diner briefly, returning with coffee cups and a local newspaper. Props, details that reinforced the cover identity. They continued north, maintaining exactly the speed limit, appearing to any observer as ordinary travelers enjoying the spring morning. They passed another surveillance vehicle without incident, the watcher's eyes sliding over them without recognition. The satellite phone buzzed as they approached the rendezvous coordinates. Becca answered, her conversation brief and coded as Jimmy had instructed. Change of plans, she reported after disconnecting. Rodriguez says Hayes has set up checkpoints on all major roads. She's redirecting to secondary rendezvous, west on County Road 27, then north on unmarked Ranch Road. They'll meet us at an abandoned cotton gin. Ethan altered course as instructed, turning onto a narrow county road that wound through agricultural land. The terrain provided better concealment but fewer escape routes. If they encountered Hayes's people here, the confrontation would be decisive. County Road 27 stretched before them, empty and vulnerable under the climbing sun. 10 miles of exposure before they reached the turnoff. Ethan maintained steady speed, eyes constantly scanning for threats, hands relaxed but ready on the wheel. Beside him, Becca kept watch on their rear, the evidence case secured between her feet. They were halfway to the turnoff when Becca tensed. Vehicle behind us, moving fast. Ethan checked the mirrors. A black SUV had appeared on the road behind them, closing distance rapidly. The same model he'd seen at Kyle's apartment complex, Hayes's tactical team. They found us, he confirmed, assessing options. The road ahead remained empty. No civilians to complicate the situation. No cover to utilize. A direct confrontation under unfavorable conditions. The SUV closed to within 100 yards, then suddenly accelerated, clearly intending to force them off the road. Ethan waited until the last possible moment, then executed a controlled brake slide, bringing the Jeep perpendicular to the road just as the SUV attempted to pull alongside. The larger vehicle swerved to avoid collision, momentarily losing control on the gravel shoulder. Hold on, Ethan warned, throwing the Jeep into reverse, then spinning it to face the opposite direction. He accelerated past the SUV before its driver could recover, buying precious seconds. There's another one ahead, Becca warned, pointing to a second SUV that had appeared at the far end of the road, blocking their retreat. Pincer movement. Professional tactics. They were being herded. Ethan made a split-second decision, veering off the road entirely and onto the adjacent farmland. The Jeep's military-grade suspension handled the rough terrain better than the SUVs could, allowing them to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. But the open field offered no long-term advantage. They were visible for miles, and the vehicles behind them had greater speed on flat ground. There, Becca pointed to a line of trees marking a creek bed that cut across the field. Watercourse could provide cover. Ethan aimed for it, pushing the Jeep to its limits across the uneven ground. Behind them, the SUVs had also left the road, spreading out to prevent escape. The creek bed appeared as a depression ahead, lined with cottonwoods and willows that would provide visual concealment, if not physical protection. They reached the trees just as the first shots rang out. Controlled bursts from professional operators, deliberately aimed at the Jeep's engine block rather than its occupants. Hayes wanted the evidence, not corpses that would raise questions. Ethan drove directly into the creek bed, the Jeep splashing through shallow water before he cut the engine in the deepest section available, perhaps 3 feet of water, enough to provide minimal cover. He grabbed the evidence case and his father's pistol, then helped Becca from the vehicle. "We need to move downstream," he instructed, supporting her weight as they waded through knee-deep water. The bank for cover. They'll focus on the Jeep first. Sure enough, the pursuers concentrated their approach on the vehicle's location, allowing Ethan and Becca to put 50 yards between themselves and the ambush point. The creek bank provided just enough elevation for concealment if they stayed low. "How far to the rendezvous?" Ethan asked, checking the satellite phone's GPS function. 3 miles, Becca replied grimly. "Might as well be 30 in my condition." Ethan assessed their situation with combat clarity. The evidence had to reach Rodriguez. That was the mission. Everything else, including their survival, was secondary. "I'll draw them off," he decided. "You continue downstream with the evidence. The creek leads within half a mile of the cotton gin. Rodriguez will find you." "No," Becca's refusal was instantaneous. "We stay together. We finish this together." "This isn't about us," Ethan countered, his voice gentle but firm. "It's about Mom and Dad. About Kyle and all the others who didn't survive. About making sure the evidence reaches the right hands." Before she could argue further, movement on the creek bank above them signaled approaching threats. Ethan pulled Becca deeper into cover as voices carried clearly through the morning air. "Spread out. They can't have gone far. The girl's in a wheelchair, for Christ's sake. Remember, Hayes wants them alive if possible, especially the evidence." "What about O'Malley?" "Neutralized, permanently." The confirmation of Jimmy's fate sent a wave of cold fury through Ethan. Another name added to the Mitchell family's long list of victims. Another debt to be paid. "Becca," he whispered, decision made. "I need you to trust me. Take the evidence and continue downstream. I'm going to create a diversion that will draw them all away from you." She started to protest, but something in his expression stopped her. "You're coming back," she said, a statement rather than a question. "I'm coming back," he confirmed, hoping it wasn't a lie. "But the evidence reaches Rodriguez no matter what. Promise me." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "I promise." Ethan transferred the satellite phone and evidence case to her, keeping only his father's pistol and a single extra magazine. 8 rounds, plus 7 in reserve. 15 chances to change the course of this fight. "Wait until you hear them moving away from here," he instructed. "Then continue downstream. Stay in the water to mask your trail. Rodriguez's people will be looking for you." Becca grabbed his arm before he could move. "Ethan, remember what Jimmy said. Dad tried to fight alone. Mom tried to fight alone. Don't make their mistake." He squeezed her hand once, then moved away, angling up the creek bank at a point 50 yards from their position. Breaking cover deliberately, he moved just slowly enough to be spotted before disappearing into the tree line. Behind him, shouts confirmed his plan had worked. "There, male subject moving north. All units converge." Ethan Collins, Force Recon Marine, son of Mark and Janet Collins, brother of Rebecca Collins, became the hunter rather than the hunted. He would lead Hayes's men on a chase designed to empty their ranks from the creek bed, to give Becca the clearest path to safety, to ensure the evidence reached federal authorities who couldn't be bought or threatened. And if this was to be his last mission, he would make it one worthy of the legacy his parents had left behind. A legacy of courage in the face of corruption, of sacrifice in the name of truth, of ordinary people standing against extraordinary evil. The battle for Millbrook had become a battle for justice itself, and as he moved through familiar Texas terrain with unfamiliar purpose, Ethan carried with him the certainty that some fights were worth any cost, even if that cost was measured in blood. The Texas sun climbed higher, burning away morning mist and casting harsh light across terrain that had become a battlefield. Ethan moved with practiced efficiency through the wooded area bordering the creek, using every skill acquired during 18 months of combat operations in Afghanistan. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind him, controlled professional movements rather than the chaotic scramble of local law enforcement. Hayes had brought military contractors, men with training similar to Ethan's own. The difference was, Ethan knew this land, had hunted it since childhood, understood its contours and secrets in ways no tactical map could convey. He paused in the shadow of a massive live oak, controlling his breathing as he assessed the situation. 4 men tracked him directly, moving in a standard search pattern. Their radio communications, audible in the quiet morning, indicated at least 6 more forming a perimeter to prevent escape. Their tactics were sound, but predictable, exactly what he would have done with a squad hunting a high-value target. Except Ethan wasn't the real target. The evidence was, which meant this pursuit was a diversion of resources, exactly as he'd intended. He needed to maintain their focus while maximizing the distance between their position and Becca's movement downstream. Each minute he kept them engaged was another minute for her to reach the rendezvous point where Agent Rodriguez waited. Ethan moved again, deliberately leaving signs of passage. Broken twigs, disturbed undergrowth, a boot print in soft earth, enough to maintain pursuit without making capture too easy. His path angled northwest, away from the creek and toward a section of ranch land dotted with ancient farm equipment, rusted harvesters and abandoned tractors left to decay when newer technology rendered them obsolete. Perfect ground for defensive operations against superior numbers. He reached the equipment graveyard 10 minutes ahead of his pursuers, enough time to establish position and prepare. The old machines created a maze of rusted metal, offering concealment and improvised cover. Ethan moved among them, assessing angles and fields of fire, identifying choke points where pursuers would be channeled into predictable paths. When the first 2 operatives entered the area, Ethan was ready. He allowed them to advance halfway through the maze before announcing his presence, not with gunfire, but with sound, a deliberate displacement of metal that drew their attention while he repositioned. "Contact," one operative murmured into his radio. "Central sector, moving to intercept." They separated, each taking a different approach route, standard procedure for clearing an area. Ethan waited until the first man passed beneath his position atop an old combine harvester, then dropped. The takedown was swift and silent, a combat technique that rendered the operative unconscious without permanent damage. Ethan secured him with his own restraints, confiscated his radio and sidearm, then moved to intercept the second man. This one was more cautious, advancing with his weapon at ready, checking corners with professional thoroughness. Ethan created a distraction, tossing a small piece of metal to clatter against a distant tractor. When the operative turned toward the sound, Ethan struck from behind, using the same blood choke that had proven effective at the storm shelter. Within seconds, another threat was neutralized. 2 down, 8 remaining. The radios crackled with increasing concern as the first 2 operatives failed to respond to status checks. The remaining team adjusted their approach, becoming more cautious, moving in tighter formations. Exactly the response Ethan wanted, slowing their advance, concentrating their attention on his position rather than widening the search area that might discover Becca. He changed tactics, becoming more aggressive. Using the confiscated radio, he transmitted false information. Subject moving toward western perimeter. All units converge. The resulting confusion bought precious minutes as the team attempted to re-establish a command and control. For 20 minutes, Ethan engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse among the rusted monuments to agricultural progress. 2 more operatives fell to ambush tactics before the remaining team recognized the pattern and adjusted. They began setting up crossfire positions, limiting his movement options, gradually tightening the noose. Time to relocate. The diversion had served its purpose. Becca should have covered significant distance by now. Ethan identified his exit route, a drainage ditch leading away from the equipment graveyard toward a distant line of trees marking another creek bed. He waited for a gap in the coverage, then moved with explosive speed, covering 30 yards of open ground before the operatives could react. Gunfire erupted behind him, controlled bursts aimed to disable rather than kill. A round grazed his left arm, burning like a hot poker but not slowing his pace. He reached the drainage ditch and dropped into it, using its minimal cover to continue his retreat while presenting the smallest possible target. The pursuit intensified, professional operators recognizing that their quarry was escaping containment. Vehicles roared to life as they attempted to cut off his route to the tree line. Ethan adjusted again, veering toward an area where the terrain dropped away into a series of limestone ridges. Difficult ground for vehicles, challenging even for men on foot. He was halfway to the ridges when a new sound cut through the morning air, the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors. Looking up, Ethan spotted a Black Bell 407 approaching from the east, its civilian paint scheme betrayed by the military precision of its flight pattern. Haze had escalated, bringing aerial assets into the hunt. The tactical situation had deteriorated significantly. Helicopter meant infrared tracking capability, eliminating most concealment options. It also meant Hayes was committing substantial resources to the operation, a sign of desperation that was both encouraging and alarming. Ethan reached the limestone formations just as the helicopter established an observation position overhead. The natural caves and overhangs provided some protection from aerial surveillance, but limited his movement options. He needed to continue drawing attention away from Becca while finding his own path to the rendezvous point. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, blood seeping through the torn sleeve of his shirt. Not serious, but a drain on stamina if not addressed. Ethan found momentary shelter in a shallow cave, tearing a strip from his undershirt to bind the wound. The pain he compartmentalized, a technique learned through years of training and combat experience. The helicopter maintained position overhead, its crew undoubtedly scanning the ridges with thermal imaging. Ground teams would be converging on the area, establishing a perimeter before beginning a methodical search. Time was running short. Ethan checked the confiscated radio, listening to the chatter as Hayes' team coordinated their efforts. One transmission caught his attention. Team 2 reports negative contact at the creek intercept point. No sign of female subject or package. Relief flooded through him. Becca had avoided detection, was hopefully close to the rendezvous by now. The mission could still succeed even if he didn't make it out. A new voice came over the radio, older, commanding, with the unmistakable cadence of someone accustomed to authority. "This is Hayes. All teams converge on Limestone Ridge section. Aerial has thermal signature. Subject is contained. I repeat, subject is contained. I want him alive." Colonel Robert Hayes, architect of Project Athena's military applications, personally directing the operation. The man who had likely ordered Janet Collins's death, who had presented her folded flag to her children while knowing he'd orchestrated her murder. Ethan's combat focus narrowed to laser precision. Hayes was here, on site, commanding the operation personally rather than through proxies. That changed the tactical landscape significantly. New objective, locate Hayes. Secondary objective, confirm Becca's successful rendezvous with Rodriguez. The mission had evolved from escape to engagement. Ethan studied the terrain, identifying a path through the limestone formations that would allow movement while minimizing exposure to aerial observation. The helicopter's search pattern was systematic but not comprehensive, focusing on areas large enough to conceal a man rather than the narrow crevices and passages that honeycombed the ridge. Moving like the predator his training had shaped him to be, Ethan worked his way through the natural labyrinth, listening to radio transmissions to track the ground team's positions. Hayes' voice appeared periodically, directing resources, demanding updates, betraying increasing frustration as the search yielded no results. "Sir, ground team reports finding blood trail. Subject is wounded. Follow it. All units converge on that position." Ethan smiled grimly. The blood trail was deliberate, drops placed strategically to lead pursuers into a box canyon while he moved in the opposite direction. Basic misdirection taught in advanced survival courses. Hayes' men would waste valuable time before realizing they'd been duped. The limestone ridge eventually gave way to more wooded terrain, a mix of cedar and live oak that provided better concealment from aerial observation. Ethan used this cover to circle back toward where command and control would logically be established, likely a vehicle positioned at the highest point in the area with good communications sightlines. He found it 20 minutes later, a mobile command post set up on a small rise overlooking the search area. 2 SUVs and a communications van, a satellite dish deployed, and a perimeter of 4 operators maintaining security. Standing beside the lead vehicle, studying a tactical display, was a tall figure with silver hair and the unmistakable bearing of career military. Colonel Robert Hayes, exactly as Ethan remembered him from his mother's funeral. The same man who had clasped his shoulder and spoken of Janet Collins's dedication and courage while knowing he had ordered her death. Ethan's hand tightened on his father's pistol, the weight of it suddenly significant in ways that transcended the tactical. 15 rounds, more than enough to complete a mission of vengeance, to balance the scales for his parents, for Jimmy O'Malley, for all the young athletes whose lives had been destroyed by Project Athena. But vengeance wasn't justice, and justice was what his parents had died seeking. A different approach was needed, one that ensured Hayes faced legal consequences rather than a quick end, one that preserved the evidence Becca carried and ensured the entire network was exposed. Ethan studied the command post setup, identifying vulnerabilities. The security was professional, but not impenetrable. 4 operators, positioned for conventional threats rather than the approach of a single, highly trained individual with intimate knowledge of the terrain. Standard communication protocols that could be exploited. And most importantly, Hayes himself, a high-value target whose capture would destabilize the entire operation. The satellite phone in his pocket vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. Package delivered. Repeat, package delivered. Extract imminent. Becca had reached Rodriguez. The evidence was secure. The primary mission was accomplished, which left Ethan free to pursue the secondary objective. Robert Hayes. The plan formed with combat clarity: create diversion, isolate Hayes, capture rather than kill, use as leverage to ensure safe extraction and proper prosecution. Risky, but with potential for complete mission success rather than partial victory. Ethan circled the command post, approaching from the blind side where the communications van blocked line of sight from 2 of the security positions. The remaining guards were focused outward, expecting threats to approach from the search area rather than from behind their own lines. Using a fallen branch, Ethan created his diversion. A series of movements in the underbrush 200 yards from the command post, just enough to draw attention and investigation. As predicted, Hayes dispatched 2 of the security team to check it out, reducing the defensive perimeter by half. The next phase required precise timing. Ethan approached the communications van, staying in its shadow until he reached the rear doors. A single operator manned the equipment inside, focused on monitoring radio traffic and coordinating the search teams. Ethan waited until the man turned away from the door, then entered with silent efficiency. 5 seconds later, the communications specialist was unconscious, secured with his own zip ties, and Ethan had control of the command post communication systems. He keyed the master override, broadcasting on all channels. All units, be advised. Federal agents approaching from the south. Multiple vehicles. Withdraw and regroup at secondary rally point. Acknowledge. The resulting confusion was immediate and predictable. Security teams requested confirmation. Field units reported no visual on federal approach. Hayes demanded clarification. Ethan allowed the chaos to build for 30 seconds, then triggered the communications van's emergency protocols, a complete system shutdown designed to protect sensitive equipment from compromise. In the momentary darkness as backup systems engaged, Ethan exited the van and moved toward Hayes's position. The colonel stood beside his vehicle, attempting to restore order via satellite phone, his attention divided between the communications failure and the reports of federal approach. The remaining security personnel had moved to defensive positions facing south, the direction from which the non-existent federal agents were supposedly approaching. It left Hayes momentarily isolated, exactly as Ethan had intended. He closed the distance with controlled aggression, emerging from cover directly behind the colonel. Before Hayes could react, the barrel of Mark Collins's Colt 1911 pressed against the base of his skull. "Hello, Colonel," Ethan said quietly. "I believe you knew my mother." Hayes froze, recognition and calculation visible in his rigid posture. A professional soldier assessing options, measuring risks, identifying leverage. "Collins," he acknowledged, voice betraying no fear despite the pistol at his neck. "I was wondering when you'd make your play." Hands where I can see them. Satellite phone on the ground. Slowly. Hayes complied with the deliberate movements of someone accustomed to command even in captivity. You realize this changes nothing, he said, as Ethan relieved him of his sidearm and radio. You're still surrounded by my people. The girl and the evidence won't get far. The evidence is already with the DEA, Ethan informed him, maintaining pressure with the pistol while securing Hayes's wrists with plastic restraints. Agent Catherine Rodriguez has everything. Tyler's records, Jimmy's documentation, the storm shelter, photographs. It's over, Colonel. A flicker of something, concern, perhaps even fear, crossed Hayes's composed features before professional control reasserted itself. Evidence can be disputed, witnesses discredited. You have no idea the resources behind this operation, Collins. The people involved. This goes far beyond a small-town football program. I know exactly how far it goes, Ethan countered, directing Hayes toward the tree line while maintaining cover from the security team's position. Military contractors, performance enhancement programs, human experimentation. My mother documented it all before you had her killed. Janet Collins was collateral damage in a much larger operation, Hayes said, his tone almost conversational despite his captivity. She shouldn't have been on that convoy. Wrong place, wrong time. Nothing personal. The casual dismissal of his mother's murder ignited Ethan's rage, but he contained it, channeled it, used it to sharpen his focus rather than cloud it. And my father, was he collateral damage too? And Jimmy O'Malley? And all those kids who died from heart failure and strokes after taking your compounds? Hayes remained silent as Ethan guided him deeper into the cover of the trees, putting distance between them and the command post before the security team realized their commander had been taken. You're a soldier, Collins, Hayes said finally. You understand necessary sacrifice. Project Athena has military applications that could save countless American lives in combat situations. Enhanced strength, accelerated healing, pain suppression, capabilities that would reduce casualties and increase mission success rates. At what cost? Ethan demanded. I've seen what it does to the users. Addiction, organ failure, psychological breakdown. You're not creating super soldiers, Colonel. You're creating disposable weapons that self-destruct after deployment. Acceptable losses for strategic advantage, Hayes replied, the cold calculation of his worldview fully revealed. Every advance has a price. The Mitchell family understood that. Their football players were perfect test subjects, young, healthy, motivated to excel at any cost. The performance data collected over decades has been invaluable in refining the compounds for military application. Human experimentation without consent, Ethan said, disgust evident in his voice. War crimes by any definition. Hayes laughed without humor. Consent? Those boys begged for the injections, for the chance to be stronger, faster, better than nature intended. The American dream in chemical form. And their parents looked the other way as long as scholarships and championships kept coming. The colonel's words held a terrible truth that Ethan couldn't deny. Millbrook had been complicit in its own corruption, a town that valued victory above ethics, that celebrated achievement without questioning its cost. But that didn't excuse what had been done to unknowing teenagers, to homeless test subjects, to anyone who threatened to expose the truth. It's still murder, Ethan stated flatly, and you're going to answer for it. A new sound interrupted their exchange, the helicopter returning, its search pattern now focused on the command post area. Hayes' security team had discovered their commander missing and called in aerial support. My people won't stop hunting you, Hayes said, confidence returning to his voice. Even if the evidence reaches federal prosecutors, there are contingencies in place. People who can make investigations disappear. Witnesses reconsider. Judges rule favorably. Maybe, Ethan acknowledged, continuing to move through the dense cedar growth toward the rendezvous coordinates Rodriguez had provided. But first they have to find us. And I know these woods a lot better than your contractors do. For the next hour, Ethan navigated through terrain he'd known since childhood, using natural features to mask their trail and confuse aerial tracking. The helicopter maintained search patterns overhead, but the dense canopy provided effective concealment from thermal imaging as long as they kept moving. Hayes remained surprisingly compliant, conserving energy and studying Ethan with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing a worthy opponent. You're good, Collins, he said during a brief rest. Better than most operators I've commanded. The Corps trained you well. My father taught me these woods before the Corps taught me anything, Ethan replied. He knew someday the Mitchell family might come after us. He just didn't expect it to be so soon. Your father was more perceptive than we gave him credit for, Hayes admitted. Most construction foremen wouldn't have recognized what was happening beneath that stadium, wouldn't have connected the dates back to the original test site. Mark Collins was inconveniently observant. Like mother, like son, Ethan said grimly. Seems to run in the family. The satellite phone vibrated again. Another text message. Extraction team en route to secondary coordinates. ETA 30 minutes. Change of plans. Rodriguez was sending a team to a fallback position rather than the original rendezvous point. Smart. Hayes's people would be watching the most obvious extraction routes. Ethan adjusted course, leading his captive toward a clearing 2 miles east that could serve as a helicopter landing zone. The direct approach would be too exposed to Hayes's aerial assets, so he plotted a route that utilized a dry creek bed for concealment during the final approach. They had covered half the distance when Hayes broke his calculating silence. You do realize what happens if I don't return, he said, his tone conversational, but underlaid with implicit threat. Contingency protocols activate. The Mitchell family becomes expendable. All evidence sources are eliminated, including your sister. Ethan maintained his pace, not giving Hayes the satisfaction of a reaction. You've lost operational control, Colonel. Your communications are compromised. Your team is scattered, and Rodriguez has federal protection around Becca already. Rodriguez, Hayes repeated the name with something like amusement. Catherine Rodriguez. Did she tell you who she really works for? Who authorized her investigation in the first place? The question raised a flag in Ethan's tactical assessment. Something in Hayes's tone suggested knowledge beyond what he should possess about a DEA operation targeting his network. The DEA, Ethan answered, watching Hayes's reaction carefully. The colonel's smile was cold and knowing. On paper, certainly. But her task force answers to a different authority. One with significant interest in Project Athena's research. Not to expose it, but to acquire it. Doubt crept into Ethan's certainty like fog on a battlefield, obscuring clear lines of fire. Could Rodriguez be compromised? Working for another agency with its own agenda regarding the performance enhancers? It would explain how she'd connected to the investigation so quickly, how she'd known exactly where to position extraction teams. You're lying, Ethan said, but without complete conviction, trying to create distrust between allies. Am I? Hayes countered. Ask yourself why a DEA agent would have military extraction capabilities. Why she would risk a multi-agency operation to recover evidence that could have been secured through standard channels. Why she specifically requested you and your sister be brought to her directly rather than to federal protective custody. The questions raised valid concerns that Ethan couldn't entirely dismiss. His combat instincts, honed by months of identifying friend from foe in a war where the distinction was rarely clear, warned of potential complications in what had seemed a straightforward alliance. Even if that were true, Ethan said carefully, it doesn't change what the Mitchells have done, what you've done. The evidence still exposes crimes that any federal prosecutor would pursue. Unless that prosecutor receives orders from above to classify the entire matter as a national security issue, Hayes pointed out, to seal the records, to ensure the research continues under different management. His eyes met Ethan's directly. Your sister isn't delivering evidence to Justice Collins. She's delivering research data to competitors. The helicopter's sound intensified overhead, its search pattern tightening around their position as if guided by more than standard search protocols. Ethan's tactical assessment shifted, incorporating new variables, identifying potential threats from unexpected vectors. If Hayes was telling the truth, or even a partial truth, then the extraction might not lead to justice, but to another form of cover-up. Different players, same exploitation. The evidence Becca carried would change hands, but not necessarily lead to accountability. Decision point: continue to extraction and risk compromising the evidence, or alter the plan to ensure maximum exposure regardless of Rodriguez's true allegiance. The satellite phone offered a solution. If Rodriguez was compromised, then direct contact with multiple federal agencies would create a record too public to bury. Too many witnesses to silence. Too much scrutiny to classify away. Move, Ethan ordered Hayes, changing direction away from the extraction coordinates. We're taking a detour. The colonel studied him with new respect. Smart. You're not sure who to trust anymore. I trust evidence, Ethan replied, and making sure enough people see it that no one can make it disappear. They reached a small rise that offered limited cell service, enough for what Ethan needed. Using the satellite phone's more secure connection, he composed a message not to Rodriguez, but to Jimmy O'Malley's lawyer, a man identified in the documents as a trusted contact with instructions to release information if Jimmy didn't check in regularly. The message was brief but comprehensive. Evidence locations, key names, instructions to contact specific journalists and congressional oversight committees. A dead man's switch that would ensure the truth reached too many destinations to be contained. Insurance policy? Hayes observed, watching Ethan work. Something my parents never had, Ethan confirmed, sending the message. Too many eyes on the evidence for anyone to bury it completely. A subtle shift in the helicopter's sound pattern alerted Ethan seconds before searchlights cut through the canopy. Precision targeting that suggested their position had been compromised. Not by tracking, but by technology. The satellite phone, of course, its signal had been traced. Appears our conversation is about to be interrupted, Hayes noted with professional detachment. I'd recommend surrender. My people are authorized to use necessary force, but I'd prefer to avoid casualties if possible. Ethan assessed options rapidly. Open ground ahead, helicopter above with spotlight capability and likely armed personnel. Ground teams converging based on the signal trace. Extraction team, possibly friendly, possibly compromised, still 20 minutes out. Tactical situation. Deteriorating rapidly. You still think this ends with you in federal custody and me facing prosecution, Hayes said, reading Ethan's calculations. Let me offer an alternative. Project Athena needs new management. Someone with ethics and oversight. Your military background, combined with your sister's scientific understanding, makes you both valuable potential assets. Join the program. Guide it toward legitimate applications. Help us perfect compounds that save American lives rather than destroy them. The offer was delivered with the confidence of someone accustomed to making deals rather than facing consequences. Someone who had never been held accountable for his actions because his position and connections had always insulated him from justice. Did you make my mother the same offer? Ethan asked quietly. Before you arranged her accident? A flicker of something, not quite regret, but perhaps recognition, crossed Hayes's features. Janet Collins was a principled woman. Too principled to see the larger picture. She would have exposed everything, destroyed decades of research, eliminated any possibility of using the compounds for legitimate military applications. We couldn't allow that. And now? Now we adapt, incorporate new perspectives. Your perspective. Hayes's voice took on the reasonable tone of a commander offering a subordinate a challenging but prestigious assignment. You've seen what uncontrolled application looks like in Millbrook. Help us do better. For a brief moment, Ethan could almost see the logic, the potential to guide the research away from exploitation toward genuine medical advancement, to honor his mother's memory by reforming rather than destroying the program she died exposing. Then he remembered Kyle Mitchell's wasted body, Jack Thompson's heart attack at 17, the unmarked graves beneath the storm shelter floor, the systematic exploitation of an entire community's children for military advantage and private profit. Some corruption couldn't be reformed. It could only be excised. Here's my counteroffer, Ethan said, his voice hard with finality. You face prosecution for everything, the deaths, the experiments, the cover-ups. You provide testimony against everyone involved, from the Mitchells to whoever authorized the program at the Pentagon. And in exchange, you get to live with the knowledge that your legacy won't be enhanced soldiers, but the exposure of one of the darkest chapters in American military research. The helicopter spotlight found them then, bathing the clearing in harsh white light that eliminated all concealment. Hayes's expression shifted from negotiation to resignation, the look of a professional recognizing when a position has become untenable. You're making a mistake, Collins, he said, raising his voice over the roar of the approaching aircraft. Some programs are too valuable to dismantle. some research too important to discard. If not us, then someone else. China, Russia, non-state actors. The genie doesn't go back in the bottle. Maybe not, Ethan acknowledged. But this genie answers for what it's done. The helicopter touched down at the edge of the clearing, rotors whipping the cedar trees into frenzied motion. From its side door emerged not Hayes' tactical team, but a group of agents in DEA windbreakers, weapons drawn, moving with coordinated precision. And at their center, striding forward with authority, was a woman Ethan recognized from Jimmy's photographs. Agent Catherine Rodriguez, her face set in the determined expression of someone closing a long-running investigation. Behind her, supported by another agent, was Becca, alive, unharmed, and watching her brother with a mixture of relief and triumph. "Ethan Collins," Rodriguez called over the helicopter noise. "Federal agents, we're here to extract you and Colonel Hayes." Ethan maintained his position, father's pistol still trained on Hayes, tactical assessment ongoing. Friendly extraction or compromised operation? Rodriguez's true allegiance remained unconfirmed. "The evidence?" he called back. "Secure," Rodriguez replied. "Multiple copies distributed to oversight authorities as per your sister's instructions. Too many eyes on it now for anyone to bury, including mine." The last statement answered the unspoken question, acknowledgement that Ethan's concerns about her role were not unfounded, but reassurance that the evidence would reach its intended destinations regardless. Hayes' expression confirmed it, the calculating assessment of a commander watching an operation unravel beyond recovery. Whatever Rodriguez's original mandate had been, the widespread distribution of evidence had changed the equation. Too many witnesses, too much exposure, too many versions of the truth to contain. "It's over, Robert," Rodriguez told Hayes as her agents moved to secure him. "Project Athena is shut down. The Mitchell operation is being raided as we speak. All test sites, all distribution networks, all financial channels." "You have no idea what you're throwing away," Hayes replied, professional composure cracking for the first time. "Decades of research, breakthrough compounds that could revolutionize combat medicine. Research built on dead teenagers and homeless test subjects," Rodriguez countered. "Not a foundation any legitimate program could build on." She turned to Ethan. "Your sister made sure of that. Every name, every victim, all documented and distributed where it can't be recalled." As Hayes was led to the helicopter, Ethan finally lowered his father's pistol, the mission shifting from combat to conclusion. Becca approached, her face showing the exhaustion and determination that had carried her through miles of hostile terrain to ensure the evidence reached its destination. "You stayed," she said simply. "You succeeded," he replied, equal simplicity conveying the depth of his pride in what she'd accomplished. Rodriguez joined them, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Your parents would be proud," she said. "Janet Collins started this investigation. You and your sister finished it." "And you?" Ethan asked directly. "Where do your orders really come from?" The agent's smile was thin but genuine. "Smart question. Originally, task force with multiple agency oversight, some wanting to expose Project Athena, others wanting to repurpose it." She glanced toward the helicopter where Hayes sat in restraints. "Your sister's evidence distribution changed the calculation. Too public now for anything but full prosecution." "And the Mitchell family?" "Richard Mitchell is in custody. His son Tyler is cooperating in exchange for consideration during sentencing. The mayor, the sheriff, the local judge, all being processed as we speak." Rodriguez's expression hardened. Millbrook's power structure is being dismantled, brick by corrupt brick. It was the outcome Mark and Janet Collins had died seeking. Justice delayed but finally delivered. Accountability for crimes spanning decades and claiming countless victims. Exposure of a system that had exploited children in the name of victory and military advantage. Yet as Ethan and Becca boarded the helicopter for extraction, watching the Texas landscape fall away beneath them, the victory felt incomplete. Jimmy O'Malley was dead. Kyle Mitchell would never recover from what had been done to him. The bodies beneath the storm shelter floor represented lives that could never be restored. Justice had been served, but at a cost measured in blood and sacrifice across generations. What happens now? Becca asked as they flew towards San Antonio, where federal authorities waited to take their official statements. Ethan looked at his sister, stronger than her physical limitations, braver than her years, the living embodiment of their parents' determination to stand against corruption, regardless of the consequences. Now, he said, we make sure it was worth it, that it means something, that it never happens again. Because some wars didn't end with a single battle. Some enemies weren't defeated by a single victory. The fight against corruption, against exploitation, against the sacrifice of the vulnerable for the advantage of the powerful. That was a war that required constant vigilance. A war his parents had begun, that he and Becca had continued, and that others would need to carry forward. As Texas stretched beneath them, beautiful and brutal, nurturing and unforgiving, Ethan Collins made a silent promise to the memory of those who had fallen in this battle for Millbrook's soul. The truth would not be buried again. Not on his watch, not while he drew breath. Some debts could only be paid with a lifetime of service to the cause of justice. And the Collins family always paid their debts. 3 months after the fall of Millbrook's power structure, the summer heat lay across Texas like a physical weight, shimmering above asphalt and pressing against windows. Ethan Collins sat in a climate-controlled federal courtroom in San Antonio, watching as Colonel Robert Hayes was led away in handcuffs, his military bearing intact despite the orange jumpsuit that had replaced his uniform. The plea agreement had been extensive, Hayes providing testimony against the entire Project Athena network in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. His detailed confession had implicated military contractors, pharmaceutical executives, Pentagon officials, and local enablers across 5 states. The Mitchell family's operation in Millbrook had been merely the most developed node in a web of corruption that stretched from rural Texas to Washington, D.C. 25 years without possibility of parole, the federal prosecutor commented, joining Ethan in the now empty courtroom. Not what he deserved, but the information he provided will lead to dozens more convictions. Ethan nodded, his expression giving nothing away. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessica Winters, had been relentless in pursuing the case, undeterred by threats, political pressure, and attempts to classify the evidence under national security provisions. What about the Mitchell family? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Richard Mitchell received 18 years for his roles as primary distributor and local coordinator. His brother William got 12 for laundering the proceeds through his construction company. Judge Mitchell, the grandfather, 7 years for using his position to quash investigations. Winters closed her portfolio with a decisive snap. The entire operation dismantled, from production to distribution to protection. And Tyler? 5 years, reduced from 15 in exchange for his cooperation. His testimony was crucial in mapping the distribution network. Winters studied Ethan's face, reading the complex emotions behind his controlled expression. He was a victim too, in many ways. Manipulated by his father from childhood, chemically altered before he was old enough to give informed consent. He pushed my sister from a 30-foot scaffolding, Ethan reminded her, the memory still capable of igniting cold fury despite the months that had passed. He knew exactly what he was doing. Yes, Winters acknowledged, and he'll serve time for that. But the court considered the chemical influence on his behavior as a mitigating factor. The same compounds that enhanced his physical capabilities also increased aggression, impaired judgment, created dependency on his father's approval. She paused. The psychiatric evaluation suggested Tyler Mitchell hadn't made a truly independent decision since he was 14 years old. The assessment matched what they'd learned about Project Athena's effects on its users. Physical enhancement at the cost of psychological autonomy. The perfect bargain for creating soldiers who would follow orders without question, athletes who would sacrifice their futures for immediate glory, citizens who would trade freedom for chemical strength. And Kyle? Ethan asked, his tone softening slightly. No charges filed, classified as a victim rather than a perpetrator. Winters' professional demeanor softened as well. His medical prognosis remains poor. The damage to his cardiovascular system is permanent, but the Federal Victim Compensation Fund is covering his treatment at a specialized facility in Houston. He's expected to live, though with significantly reduced quality of life. It wasn't justice, not fully, but it was accountability, consequences for actions taken, prices paid for crimes committed. More than Mark and Janet Collins had lived to see. More than Jimmy O'Malley had died expecting. What about the military application? Ethan asked, addressing the question that had haunted him since Hayes' capture. The research, the compounds, will they truly be abandoned or just transferred to different oversight? Winters hesitated, the slight pause revealing the complexity behind her answer. The official position is that all Project Athena research has been terminated. The chemical formulas classified and secured. She met his gaze directly. The unofficial reality is more complicated. Some elements of the research, particularly those related to accelerated healing and pain management, have been transferred to legitimate medical research programs under strict ethical guidelines and congressional oversight. And the performance enhancement aspects, Ethan pressed, the compounds that turned teenagers into championship athletes and then killed them, officially abandoned, Winters replied. But military research never truly ends, Ethan finished for her. It just changes hands, goes deeper underground, continues under different code names with better security. The prosecutor didn't confirm or deny, but her expression acknowledged the reality they both understood. Some genies couldn't be returned to their bottles. Some knowledge, once obtained, would always be pursued, if not by American military researchers, then by foreign powers or private interests with fewer ethical constraints. The difference, Winter said finally, is that now there's a record, documented abuses, known consequences, congressional oversight committees watching for similar patterns. It's not perfect, but it's better than the unaccountable black program Hayes was running. It would have to be enough, Ethan realized. Complete victory, the total abandonment of chemical performance enhancement research, had always been an unrealistic objective. The realistic goal was accountability, transparency, ethical constraints on how such research proceeded in the future. There's one more thing you should know, Winters added, retrieving a document from her portfolio. The federal investigation into your mother's death has been officially reopened. With Hayes' testimony and the evidence recovered from Mitchell's records, we can now prove it wasn't an enemy IED that killed her convoy. It was an ordered assassination carried out by private contractors working for Hayes. The confirmation of what they'd suspected brought no satisfaction, only a hollow ache where closure should have been. Janet Collins had died because she'd discovered the truth about Project Athena. Mark Collins had died because he'd found evidence of its earliest victims. The knowledge had always been there, but official acknowledgement made it somehow more final. Will anyone be prosecuted for that specifically? Ethan asked. The actual operators are dead, killed in subsequent operations or accidents that eliminated potential witnesses. Hayes is the highest-ranking survivor who can be directly linked to the order. Winters closed her portfolio with finality. He'll never acknowledge it publicly, but his plea agreement includes the understanding that his sentence covers those deaths as well. Justice imperfect but real. The most any system designed and operated by flawed human beings could deliver. Thank you, Ethan said simply, standing to leave, for seeing this through despite the pressure to bury it. Winters offered a professional handshake, but her eyes conveyed genuine respect. Your family paid the highest price to expose this conspiracy, Mr. Collins. Seeing it through was the least we could do to honor that sacrifice. Becca was waiting outside the courthouse, her wheelchair positioned beneath a live oak that provided respite from the merciless Texas sun. 3 months had changed her, not physically, but in the subtle confidence that now informed her posture, the clarity of purpose that shone in eyes so like their mother's. It's done? She asked as Ethan approached. As done as it can be, he confirmed, taking position behind her wheelchair. Hayes took the plea, 25 years without parole. His testimony is securing convictions throughout the network. And the Mitchell family? All serving time, different facilities, different sentences, but all held accountable. They moved away from the courthouse in comfortable silence, each processing the culmination of a journey that had begun with violence in a high school cafeteria and expanded to encompass military conspiracies, pharmaceutical crimes, and the redemption of their parents' sacrifices. I got the acceptance letter yesterday, Becca said as they reached Ethan's truck. Johns Hopkins, full scholarship for their biochemistry program. Pride swelled in Ethan's chest. Mom would have been thrilled. She's the reason I applied. Her notes on chemical compounds, even the military applications, showed brilliant understanding of how these substances interact with the human physiology. Becca's expression held the perfect balance of sadness and determination. I want to understand what she understood, but use it differently, for healing rather than enhancement. You will, Ethan assured her, helping her into the passenger seat with practice movements, and you'll do it better than anyone ever has. The drive from San Antonio toward the smaller town where they'd established temporary residence took them through the Texas Hill Country, a landscape of rolling terrain, limestone outcroppings, and scattered ranches that retained its beauty despite the summer heat. It was different from Millbrook's flatter cotton country, a deliberate choice to distance themselves from the community that had harbored so many painful memories. Have you decided? Becca asked after several miles of comfortable silence. About the offer? The offer. Agent Rodriguez's proposal that Ethan join a specialized task force dedicated to identifying and investigating similar programs, black projects operating without proper oversight, exploiting vulnerable populations for military or pharmaceutical advancement. His background as a Marine combined with his firsthand experience uncovering Project Athena made him uniquely qualified for the role. Still considering, he replied, though they both knew he'd already made his decision. It would mean relocating to Washington. Only until I finish the semester, Becca pointed out. Then I'll be in Baltimore, close enough to visit on weekends. The casual way she incorporated separation into her planning struck Ethan anew. Her resilience, her willingness to build an independent future while maintaining their connection. So different from the frightened months after their mother's death, when he'd worried his deployment would leave her completely alone. You know you don't need my permission, he said gently, or my protection anymore. Becca's smile held the wisdom of someone who had faced death and emerged stronger. I never needed permission, Ethan, but everyone needs protection sometimes, even Marines. The truth of her statement resonated more deeply than she could know. During the darkest moments of the past months, the firefight at Jimmy's cabin, the pursuit through the limestone ridges, the confrontation with Hayes, it had been the knowledge that Becca was counting on him that had kept Ethan focused, had prevented him from surrendering to rage or despair when either would have been easier than continuing the fight. Rodriguez says there are at least 3 other programs similar to Athena operating domestically, he said after a moment, the decision crystallizing as he spoke. Different compounds, different targeting methods, but the same basic approach, using vulnerable populations as test subjects for military applications. And you want to stop them, Becca stated rather than asked, the same way Mom tried to stop Athena. But not alone, Ethan clarified, with federal backing, a team, oversight, the things she didn't have. They crossed the Guadalupe River, its water low but still flowing despite the summer drought, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, life found ways to persist, to move forward, to seek its natural course. I think it's what Dad would have wanted, Becca said thoughtfully. He always said your greatest strength wasn't physical. It was your sense of justice, your inability to look away when others were being harmed. The assessment brought unexpected emotion, their father's voice echoing across years, his principles surviving beyond his life through the children he'd raised to continue his legacy of standing against corruption. We'll need to sell the Millbrook house, Ethan noted, shifting to practical considerations. It's just sitting empty now. Already listed, Becca confirmed. Sarah Mitchell has been helping with the arrangements. She caught Ethan's surprised expression. She's still there working to rebuild the community. Says somebody has to stay and make sure it never happens again. Sarah Mitchell, daughter of the man who had orchestrated so much suffering, choosing to remain in Millbrook and work toward the redemption rather than escape the shadow of her family's crimes. It spoke to a courage different from Becca's, but equally vital. The courage to face a community's collective guilt and begin the long process of healing. What about the memorial? Ethan asked. Breaking ground next month. The foundation's been established. Funding secured. Becca's voice held quiet pride. 23 names, every athlete who died because of Project Athena, plus Mom, Dad, and Jimmy. The James O'Malley Memorial Foundation had been Becca's first initiative after the case concluded, a nonprofit dedicated to education about performance-enhancing substances in support for victims of exploitation. Funded primarily by assets seized from the Mitchell family and their associates, it represented the transformation of a corruption's profits into healing resources. Jimmy would have hated having his name on anything, Ethan observed with a small smile. He was the definition of operate in the shadows. Exactly why it needs to be there, Becca countered. The people who work from the shadows to protect others deserve recognition, even if they'd never seek it themselves. The wisdom in her statement struck Ethan anew. His sister had emerged from trauma not just resilient, but philosophical, able to extract meaning from suffering in ways that transform personal pain into communal healing. They reached their temporary home as afternoon transitioned toward evening, a modest ranch house on 2 acres, rented during the trial proceedings to keep them close to San Antonio while providing the privacy necessary for recovery. It had become a sanctuary during the months of testimony, evidence review, and psychological processing of all they had uncovered. We should celebrate, Becca suggested, as Ethan helped her from the truck. The convictions, your decision, my acceptance, proper closure before new beginnings. He agreed, understanding the psychological importance of marking transitions, something their military father and medical mother had both practiced in their different ways. Janet Collins had always prepared special meals before deployments or after returns. Mark Collins had maintained rituals for closing chapters, as he called significant life changes. They prepared dinner together in the simple kitchen, Ethan handling tasks requiring reach, Becca managing preparation from her adapted workstation. The easy coordination of siblings who had learned to function as a team long before crisis demanded it. Over the meal, they allowed conversation to flow without the weight of courtroom proceedings or investigation details. Becca's academic plans, Ethan's thoughts on Washington, memories of family traditions they might adapt to their new circumstances. Normal discussion that felt both foreign and essential after months focused entirely on justice and survival. As evening settled around the small house, they moved to the porch with coffee, watching as stars emerged in the Texas sky, the same stars that had witnessed generations of Collins' family resilience against forces that would have broken lesser spirits. I got a letter from Kyle Mitchell yesterday, Becca said, breaking a comfortable silence. From the treatment facility. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. What did he want? To apologize for his role in everything, even though he was mostly a victim himself. She sipped her coffee, expression contemplative. He also wanted to provide additional information about the earliest test subjects, names he remembered his father and grandfather discussing, people whose families never knew what happened to them. For the memorial? Becca nodded. And for proper burial, if the remains can be located and identified. He feels it's the only meaningful reparation he can offer from his hospital bed. Redemption sought through truth, perhaps the only authentic path forward for anyone connected to Project Athena's decades of exploitation. Not forgetting or minimizing the damage done, but acknowledging it fully as the first step toward healing. Will you include them? Ethan asked. Every name we can verify, Becca confirmed. The homeless men used in the earliest experiments. The foreign fighters tested in conflict zones. The military contractors who didn't know what they were taking. All of them victims of the same system that valued chemical enhancement over human dignity. Her commitment to comprehensive justice, not just for their family, not just for Millbrook's athletes, but for every person harmed by Project Athena, reflected their mother's ethical worldview. Janet Collins had seen her patients not as Americans or Afghans, but as human beings deserving equal care. That universal compassion had led her to investigate suspicious patterns regardless of which side the victims fought for. Mom would be proud of that approach, Ethan said softly, seeing the full humanity of everyone involved. Even the Mitchells, Becca added, her expression suggesting she'd given this considerable thought. They weren't born monsters. They became what the system rewarded. Richard Sr. for developing compounds that gave military advantage. Richard Jr. for creating championship teams that brought glory to Millbrook. Tyler for maintaining the legacy regardless of the cost. Understanding doesn't excuse, Ethan reminded her, though without heat. No, she agreed, but it prevents the next iteration. If we see the Mitchells simply as evil people rather than products of systems that incentivize their worst impulses, we miss the opportunity to change those systems. The insight reflected wisdom beyond her years, the kind of perspective that transformed personal victimhood into visionary leadership. Becca wasn't simply surviving what had happened to her. She was extracting lessons that might prevent similar exploitation of others. Is that what you'll study at Johns Hopkins? Ethan asked. The systems rather than just the chemicals. Both, she replied with quiet certainty. The compounds and the context that make them dangerous. The same formula that destroyed Kyle Mitchell's heart could, with proper ethical constraints, help soldiers survive battlefield trauma or patients recover from debilitating injuries. A redemptive application, Ethan observed. Exactly, Mom saw that possibility even while exposing the abuses. Her notes included potential therapeutic uses alongside her documentation of exploitation. Becca's expression held the perfect balance of determination and hope. That's her real legacy, not just exposing darkness, but identifying pathways toward light. As night deepened around them, brother and sister sat in companionable silence, each contemplating the journey that had brought them to this moment of transition. From the horror of that high school cafeteria through the revelation of decades-long conspiracy to the courtroom where justice had finally been secured, a path marked by sacrifice but culminating in something approaching peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of knowing that their parents' deaths had not been in vain, that the system that had claimed them had been exposed and at least partially dismantled, that future generations of vulnerable young athletes would not be exploited as unwitting test subjects for military enhancement programs. I've been thinking about something Hayes said during his testimony, Ethan said finally, about how every small town has its secrets, its power structures that exploit the vulnerable while maintaining the appearance of community values. You think there are more Millbrooks out there, Becca inferred, more communities built on exploitation disguised as tradition. I know there are, Ethan confirmed. Rodriguez's task force has identified patterns in at least 7 other states. Different manifestations, same basic approach, using local institutions as cover for experimentation or distribution. Which is why you need to take the position, Becca concluded, because you understand how these operations hide in plain sight, how they use community loyalty as a shield against scrutiny. The decision that had been forming for weeks crystallized into certainty. Ethan Collins, Marine, son of Mark and Janet Collins, brother of Rebecca Collins, had found his post-military purpose, continuing the work his parents had begun, using his training to protect the vulnerable from exploitation by the powerful. I'll call Rodriguez tomorrow, and he said, accept the position. Becca reached across to squeeze his hand, the simple gesture conveying approval, solidarity, and shared purpose. We finish what they started, she said softly. Different approaches, same mission. The phrase captured their complementary paths forward. Ethan pursuing justice through investigation and enforcement, Becca through science and education. Different methods serving the same fundamental commitment to ensuring that what happened in Millbrook never happened again. As midnight approached, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. He opened it with the caution that had become second nature during the investigation, then smiled slightly at the contents. Sarah Mitchell, he explained to Becca's questioning look. The Millbrook High School Board just voted to demolish the stadium and return the land to green space. The replacement will be built on neutral ground at a fraction of the cost, with the difference going to establish scholarships in the names of the students who died. Symbolic and practical, Becca observed, acknowledging the past while creating better pathways forward. She also says Deputy Tanner has been appointed interim sheriff following Reeves's conviction. His first official act was to establish a citizen oversight committee for all law enforcement operations in the county. Small changes that signaled larger transformations, a community beginning the long process of rebuilding not just physical structures, but moral foundations. Millbrook would never return to what it had been before Project Athena's exposure, but perhaps it could evolve into something better. A town that valued transparency over championships, ethical leadership over victory at any cost. Do you ever think about going back, Becca asked, to see the changes? To visit Mom and Dad's graves? Ethan considered the question, examining his emotional response to the thought of returning to Millbrook. The town held their family history, generations of Colin's ancestors in the cemetery on Willow Hill, the home where they'd grown up, the community that had shaped them before corruption had claimed their parents and nearly destroyed them. Someday, he decided, not yet, but eventually. When the memorial is complete, Becca suggested, when there's something there that honors the truth rather than concealing it. A fitting time, Ethan agreed. The night deepened around them, stars brightening as true darkness settled over the Texas landscape. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, ancient voices untroubled by human conspiracies or the rise and fall of corrupt empires. Nature's reminder that beyond the complexities of human justice lay simpler truths: survival, connection, the persistent movement of life toward continuation despite obstacles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Ethan's relocation preparations, Becca's academic arrangements, the ongoing work of ensuring that Project Athena's exposure led to meaningful reforms rather than cosmetic changes. The battle for justice never truly ended. It merely transformed as new threats emerged and new vulnerabilities required protection. But tonight, in this moment of transition between what had been and what would come, the Collins siblings allowed themselves to experience something that had eluded them since their parents' deaths: the quiet satisfaction of missions completed, promises kept, legacies honored. Not closure, that perfect state of emotional resolution existed more in fiction than reality, but something perhaps more valuable: the integration of past suffering into purposeful forward movement, the transformation of victimhood into advocacy, of trauma into wisdom. To Mom and Dad, Becca said softly, raising her coffee mug in the starlight, and to Jimmy, the truth-tellers. To the truth-tellers, Ethan echoed, completing the improvised ritual, past, present, and future. Because that was the real legacy of Mark and Janet Collins, not just the children they had raised or the corruption they had fought, but the commitment to truth they had instilled, the understanding that integrity wasn't a state to be achieved, but a continuous choice to be made, regardless of consequences. A legacy now carried forward by their children, in different ways but with shared purpose: the scientist and the investigator, the healer and the protector. Complementary approaches to the same fundamental mission: ensuring that power never again exploited vulnerability without consequence. As midnight passed and a new day technically began, Ethan and Becca Collins sat together beneath Texas stars, their shared silence containing all that needed to be said between siblings who had faced death together and emerged not just surviving, but purposeful. The battle for Millbrook was over, but the larger war for justice continued, and they would fight it together, in memory of those who had shown them that some principles were worth any sacrifice, even life itself. Some debts could only be paid forward through lives dedicated to ensuring that future generations never faced the same exploitation their community had endured. And the Collins family always paid their debts.